Hello, horror fans, and welcome back to the Script to Screen podcast, where we delve into the spine-tingling world of horror cinema. Each week, we look at the scariest scenes, unmask the deeper meanings behind your favourite horror films, and explore the psychology of fear that keeps us coming back for more.
From script analysis to scene breakdowns, we'll be dissecting your favorite horror movies to see just what makes them tick. So whether you're a seasoned horror aficionado or just starting to explore the genre, join us as we unravel the spine-tingling stories that haunt the silver screen.
I'm Will.
And I am Lee.
So for those of you that may be new to the show, go check out our website. That's scripttoscreenpodcast.com. You can find a lot more insight there into the scripts and the films that we cover. We've added all sorts of stuff, haven't we, Lee? We've got scarology graphs. They illustrate the scares in each of the films. We've also got annotated script excerpts to highlight some of the ideas and the concepts we cover when dissecting the screenplays. So if you want to go deeper on your favorite scripts, there's more to interest, entertain, and delight over at scripttoscreenpodcast.com. Also, if you like what we're doing here, please like and share the episodes if you can. It really helps us reach new people. And if you're enjoying the shows and you listen regularly, please leave us a review, because that is amazing for us. Also helps us find new people. So that would be awesome. But in the meantime, Lee, how have you been? And what have you been watching, dude?
Besides like melting to a block of slobbering cheese in this heat, I've not been too bad. I've been too bad.
It's a little uncomfortably warm.
Oh mate, it's awful, and it's not just like the British like heat either. It's just like, oh, it's too damn hot. But this week, the last couple of weeks actually, I've been enjoying Tales from the Crypt on Shudder. And I've never seen Tales from the Crypt before, and there's some great episodes in there. You know, sometimes, I mean, like any anthology show, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You have some like great ones, you have some bad ones, and some sort of middling ones. But they run for about like 25 minutes, 30 minutes each, and it's just a nice, cool thing to have on in the background and just watch. It's really good. I also caught the original Prom Night for the first time, which was
Okay.
It was okay. It was okay. It very much wanted to be Halloween. It wanted to be Halloween so bad. You can literally feel the desperation pouring from the screen. It's like screaming, like "Love me." But the killer was so inept though that it became almost laughable in places. It was almost comedic.
I've definitely heard of Prom Night, but yeah, never seen it.
It's a famous one. You know, it wasn't awful, but I think it was just the terrible killer was just kind of killed it for me.
Okay.
But on the subject of Prom Night, I then watched Prom Night 2.
Okay.
And this one was so much fun. Although it did also suffer from the original's desire to be a different movie. This one was clearly made just after A Nightmare on Elm Street, because instead of being haunted by a disfigured slasher, these teens, they were stalked by the spirit of a 50s teenage nymphomaniac. And we all know how the 80s viewed sexual promiscuity. So
yeah. I mean, that's a death sentence if ever I heard one.
yeah, absolutely. But it was a really cool film. There were some really great visuals in there. But like I say, it really, really wanted to be A Nightmare on Elm Street. You could see that clear as day, which coincidentally ties in very nicely with this week's movie.
That it does, Lee. That it does. Before we get there, I mean, I managed to catch a few things. I saw a film called Sleuth with Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier, and this is directed by the great Joseph L. Mankiewicz. I'm sure there's a name that many people are familiar with. Certainly his older brother Herman was known for writing Citizen Kane. He's the subject of the Fincher film, a fairly recent film called Mank. I don't know if you've seen that, but I mean, Joe, he was a prolific writer and director who racked up, 4 Oscars during Hollywood's golden age. He's probably most famous for a film called All About Eve. But Sleuth, I mean, this was his last film as a director. Have to say, Lee, I mean, fucking banger. It was funny. It's totally odd. It's kind of off the wall. It had sort of some darkness to it in places as well, a bit of an edge. But the two leads are just kind of extraordinary in this, and it was really quite surprising too, and not quite what I expected, but just a total joy. So I would kind of highly recommend this one for anyone looking for something different and interesting, and a little bit old school to escape to. I also went to the cinema. I caught Disclosure Day. I enjoyed that too. Very kind of Spielbergian, as you'd expect. I mean, the cast is great. You know, Emily Blunt's amazing. Colin Firth's great, and Josh O'Connor's also really, really good. And I think, for me, it's just great to get to sort of go and watch a new Spielberg movie in the cinema. It won't be happening forever. And I think you got to grasp these opportunities. They need to be embraced while they're still around because he is kind of probably the greatest kind of living filmmaker, easily up there as one of the greats of all time. So, yeah, that was a pure little piece of cinematic joy for me, Lee.
That's interesting. I haven't heard a lot of good stuff about Disclosure Day, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
the
it's not
most of the
his
reviews I've read
strongest.
have put it like they've said it's okay. It's not great.
Yeah. I would kind of say, I mean, he's got such a high bar that it's very difficult
Yeah.
to reach those heights consistently all the
Yeah,
time. But
I'm sure an average Spielberg movie is still like
it's better than most people's
stars
best
above
movie.
like what most people
Yeah.
could do on their best day.
But I mean, like I say, I just think, that you're not going to get too many more opportunities to go and see a new Spielberg film in the cinema and
Yeah.
have that experience. And, I just think it's worth doing for me anyway. But I'm a bit of a nerd, so what do I know?
Ah, no, absolutely, man, absolutely. So anyway, what is strapped on the table for dissection this week, my man?
Right. Well, this week, Lee, we are kicking off seasons four original versus remake SmackDown. We seem to have gone a bit wrestling there somehow, with a deep dive into what has been, it's been one of our most requested films of all time. This hasn't it? And that's
It
the
has
the
indeed, yeah.
iconic slasher classic, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, this is going to be a good one. I mean, this is arguably Wes Craven's magnum opus. You know, some would argue Scream. I love Scream, don't get me wrong, but I'm firmly on Nightmare on Elm Street for this one.
Yeah,
And there is going to be, I can already tell, there's already going to be a lot of good stuff to dig into here.
it's going to be very interesting, isn't it? So, without further ado, let's get into it. Nightmare on Elm Street was released November 16th, 1984, filmed on a budget of little under $2 million. It would go on to rake in almost 26 million at the global box office, and would establish its razor-fingered villain Freddy Krueger as one of, if not the most iconic horror villain of all time. Freddy would return time and time again with seven sequels and also the 2010 remake. But the poor reception of this latest installment has effectively kind of left the franchise on ice, certainly for the past 16 years. Lee, do you have any thoughts on why this remake struggled to connect with fans?
A few. I mean, the way that we'll get into a lot of this next episode, but I think the biggest problem with Nightmare as a franchise, and when it comes to nailing a remake, is it's probably Fred. Well, it is. It's Freddy himself. I mean, Robert Englund is so iconic in that role, and so much of Freddy comes directly from him that I think any remake is going to struggle to win over fans. I mean, it's so hard to separate the character from the actor in this aspect. I'm not saying that Robert Englund is anything like Freddy, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's it's just it's like Hugh Jackman and Wolverine. You know, they're just
yeah.
iconic. And don't get me wrong, Jackie L. Healy did a really good job in the remake. He's a fantastic actor. But if you were to ask me to close my eyes and visualize his version of Freddy, it's a struggle. It didn't really leave an impression on me. Whereas England's Freddy, just like boom, picture perfect in my mind every time. And you could argue that if they'd made more of if they'd followed on from the remake, then perhaps he would have become a little bit more iconic, a little bit more attuned to the role and associated with the role.
Mm,
But I think this is the problem because the other slasher icons, Michael, Jason, Leatherface, Ghostface, they're all really easy to replace because they're pretty much little more than faceless avatars. They have their unique visual quirks and their silhouette theory is on point, but they all boil down basically to a man in a suit. And then you got Chucky as well. I mean, Chucky lies somewhere in between, I think, as his defining characteristic is arguably his iconic voice. And while Robert Englund may have aged out of Freddy, I think Brad Dourif can comfortably sit in a voice recording studio for a couple of days at a time, for the foreseeable future at least. I kind of see a similar potential problem with Art the Clown, though not to the same extent. But when you have an extremely charismatic actor who can, visually or audibly emote really well, they're going to be extremely hard to replace, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So do you think the franchise is kind of unsalvageable at this point, Lee, or?
No, absolutely not. But I think the casting has to be pretty spot on perfect. And it has to be someone who isn't afraid to stick around for a good decade or two if the franchise takes off again, which it deserves to. I think you need to do like a big public announcement, who will be the new Freddy, draw it out online, have people send in audition tapes, make a viral website out of it, even if you have no intention of hiring any of these people. Just make it something with massive fan interaction, let it go viral, and then make the announcement kind of doomsday style.
Mm,
Obviously, it wouldn't be anywhere near as big, but you get that fan buzz, especially amongst the horror crowd. We're a rabid bunch, we're a loyal bunch, and we appreciate shit like that. I mean, that's what I would do anyway.
yeah. Any no pun intended, Lee, but any dream castings for for a new Freddy?
I don't know. Part of me feels like it should almost be an unknown at this point, or someone you'd never expect in the role, like a Ledger Joker kind of deal. I've heard Kevin Bacon's name floated around, and I think he'd be great. I mean, he can nail pretty much anything. Part of me would almost like to see Jim Carrey have a crack at it. I think there's some potential there, but I know
Yeah.
he's largely retired and he's not a fan of violent movies anymore either.
Yeah. Well, just for funsies, Lee, narrow it down for us. Give me three actors that you'd maybe like to see in the role.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Okay, I'll purposefully go with slightly younger actors for the most part, but I think my dream team of potential Freddys would be Will Poulter, Walton Goggins, and David Dastmalchian. I think any of those would absolutely nail it. I mean, I've wanted to see Poulter in a real good villain role for a long time, ever since he kind of stepped away from the It remake. I think he's a great actor, and I think he has a
Mm,
great kind of physicality. I think he'd be awesome. Goggins would just bring the charisma and the unpredictability. He'd be fantastic, I think. And I think Das Malkian I think he would just kind of ascend into the role. He's massively into his horror. He's a really kind of cool guy, and he loves loves horror franchises. He has a very deep insider knowledge of it, and I think he would give it everything and more.
yeah, yeah. He's definitely interesting to look at, isn't he? Makes some interesting choices. Yeah, I mean Poulter and yeah, Goggins would be good too. Yeah, I feel like they would be very different Freddys with those two.
Mm,
You'd get a very different take on the character. But yeah, good
yeah. How about you?
choices.
Who would you pick?
Um, I'm not sure to be honest. I mean, maybe like someone like Willem Dafoe, maybe.
Maybe. The problem is I feel like he's too old now, man. I mean, I'm guessing he's about the same age as England
Yeah,
now.
probably. Yeah,
I mean, apologies to both men if I'm way off there. I think back
age
in the
shaming.
early 2000s, he would have killed it. Like we're in that kind of prime Spider-Man kind of villain kind of era of his.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he'd have nailed it.
I think he's got the physicality for it. He's very
Oh yeah,
expressive physically.
absolutely.
So, someone like that maybe. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the script we'll be comparing the film to today, Lee.
Okay, dokes. So we'll be using an undated copy of the script written by Wes Craven and weighing in at a pretty wide 121 pages. So this is going to be a real interesting one when it comes to the page check, as the film itself is only around 90 minutes long. So we've got an extra 30 pages floating around in there. So I'll be interested to see where that goes.
Interesting. Okay. All right then, folks. So without further delay, let's strap down and slice open the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. When teenager Nancy Thompson and her friends experience the same nightmares of a scarred killer with razor fingers, sleep becomes a deadly ordeal. As the body count rises and adults hide the truth, Nancy must uncover the twisted killer's origins and confront the monster in his own dream world before succumbing to sleep and becoming a victim of the Springwood slasher herself. So we open somewhere dark, industrial, and sinisterly. The movie's eerie soundtrack kicks in immediately to do some heavy lifting as we watch a shadowy figure set to work. And he's building something, Lee, something sinister, a glove with knives for fingers.
Man, I mean, this opener is so iconic. I feel like we should spend just a little bit of time here. So here's that opening scene as it's written in the script.
Interior, montage. Nightmare music theme begins as we fade up on a series of shots, all close and teasing. A man's feet, in shabby work shoes, stalking through a junk bin in a dark, firelit, ash-dusted place. A huge boiler room is what it is, although we only glimpse it piecemeal. Then we see a man's hand, dirty and nail-bitten, reach into frame and pick up a piece of metal. Another angle, as the hand grabs a grimy work glove and slashes it with a straight razor until its fingers are off. Close on same hands dumping 4 fishing knives out of a filthy bag. Their blades are thin, curved, gleaming sharp. More angles, even closer. We can hear the man's wheezing breathing, but we still haven't seen his face. We never will. We just see more metal being assembled with crude tools into some sort of linkage. A splayed, spidery sort of apparatus against a background light of fire and a deep rushing of steam and heavy dark energy. Then we see this linkage attached to the glove. Then the blades attached to all of it. Then the man's hand slips into the glove-like apparatus, filling it out and transforming it into an awesome, deadly claw hand with 4 razor talons gleaming at its blackened fingertips. Suddenly the hand arches and strikes forward, slashing through a dark canvas, tearing it to shreds. Yeah, so you can't beat opening on a montage, Lee. So why are you so hot on this opener, dude?
Well, first off, and this is only really applicable with hindsight, but yeah, this isn't just the creation of the iconic glove. It's the birth of Freddy Krueger himself. The first time we see this legend of horror and modern cinema on screen is like as Spider-Man would say, it's a canon event, and it would change the course of movie history forever. And second up, we have to consider why a razor-fingered glove. This one's pretty easy, but no less fascinating because as human beings, we are at our most basic, highly evolved mammals. And like every animal, we've survived countless generations due to fear. We instinctively fear things that could prove harmful to us. And 2 of the biggest are teeth and claws. Because back in the day, there was a very good chance that'd be how we met our end. I mean, now Steven Spielberg, as we spoke about earlier, he played on this instinctive fear to great effect with Jaws, with teeth. And with teeth taken, Craven went for the next best thing, claws. Something ironically Spielberg would circle back to with the Velociraptors from Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
So the glove it's definitely Freddy's calling card, but there's so much more that went into crafting such a renowned killer. The hat, the burn scars, the red and green sweater, it all just serves to create this unique and unforgettable boogeyman. And incidentally, the sweater was shaded red and green because, according to art color theory, those 2 colors clash and can produce feelings of nausea when put together, harkening back to our ancestral fears theory, perhaps due to kind of representing gore and rot, things you'd see on dead bodies.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at these color theories and the types of sort of emotions they evoke and how you can use those visually in anything, whether it's film or marketing or whatever it is. It's quite interesting stuff. Anyway, we're out of the gate running on this one, Lee. So we move on now to a young girl, Tina, creeping nervously down a dark hallway, and she's scared and disorientated and dressed, Lee, in an old school nightdress.
Absolutely. Before meeting Tina in the script, we get a very brief establishing shot of Los Angeles at night before cutting to the frightened girl.
Yeah, so any thoughts on why they cut this? I mean, I know it's not exactly an important shot, but it's a bit early in the game to be taking stuff out, maybe?
I mean, like you said, it's not an important shot. And I think if it had been left in rather than thinking, oh my God, where is this poor girl? We'd automatically be thinking, okay, she's in LA somewhere,
Yeah.
which is it's a very different vibe from being lost to being like, okay, you're there. I know LA is a big place, but I
Yeah.
think I'm getting my point across there.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. So Tina makes her way nervously down the corridor, and someone is whispering her name, Lee, and she's startled by a lamb skittering down the corridor.
There's no dialogue in the script at this point, but the lamb is still present and obviously dives straight into thematic symbology representing innocence, purity, and sacrifice.
Yeah, quite so. It certainly feels like poor Tina is being led to the slaughter as she flees
Mm.
the corridor into a dark, dank boiler room, which looks a lot like the one we glimpsed in the opening teaser. And this is Freddy's home turf, Lee. He prowls it like a spider in a web. He knows every pipe, every railing, and once Tina is inside, we get a genuine feel for the true danger she's in. And remember, technically, we don't know this is a dream yet, although the clues are definitely there. Tina creeps through the harsh industrial setting until she's finally set upon by the shadowy figure from the opening scene, and she kind of runs.
Yeah, it's some of the worst movie running I've ever seen. She's just kind of bobbing up and down on the spot, really, and it looks pretty bad.
Yeah, it's really quite lame. But let's not let one little boo boo ruin a great scene. Tina slowly sprints away, only to find herself trapped in a dead end, Lee. And it looks like she may have somehow evaded her pursuer until he leaps up from behind, startling her, us, and waking Tina in her bed. And phew, like Bobby Ewing's death, Lee, it was all a dream.
Thank goodness for that. There's a few interesting tidbits in the script here, so check it out.
Tina opens her mouth to scream, but only a dry yellow dust pours out. And at that precise moment, a huge shadowy man with a grimy red and yellow sweater and a weird hat pulled over his scarred face lunges at her. And it's his fingers that are tipped with the long blades of steel, glinting in the bony light and giving the Hulk the look of an otherworldly predator. Tina dodges away, her legs suddenly elephantine and slow. The man seizes the trailing hem of her nightgown and hauls her back. The music shrieks as Tina manages to tear free. The man lurches after her with a hoarse shout.
So first up, as you've no doubt noticed in the original script, Freddy wore a red and yellow sweater. And as we mentioned just previous, this was changed as the colors red and green provide a much more visceral reaction. And secondly, this action line actually explains Tina's god-awful running prowess.
Nice.
It says Tina dodges away, her legs suddenly elephantine and slow. So I want to take this opportunity to apologize to poor Tina for mocking her visible lack of acceleration. You know, all these years, the poor lass was just acting as she was told.
Yeah. Well, with Tina's athleticism vindicated, I just want to hone in on something you alluded to earlier in the sound design on this film. It's really, really on point, isn't it?
Absolutely, man. I mean, the composer, the sound team really knocked it out of the park with this one.
So Tina wakes to find it was all just a vivid nightmare, and she's consoled by her mother, who points out the four clean slashes through the front of her nightdress. One vivid nightmare indeed, Lee, I think.
Mm. So this is a really important scene because it basically sets the rules for the rest of the film. It shows us that not only are these kids being stalked in their dreams, but what happens in that dream state also seems to carry over into reality, thus presenting the possibility of real, genuine, life-threatening danger. I mean, we're only four scenes into the film, and already the villain and the rules of the world have been sort of laid out, even if not yet fully clarified. It's just absolutely top-tier writing.
Yeah, when Craven cooked, he cooked hard, right?
Yeah.
An unnerved Tina grabs the crucifix from her wall, and I think just as a added protection at this point.
Yeah. Now, in the script, we get a burn in superimposed of the words the first day, but this is absent from the film. And we also get a wicked pre-lap of the infamous Nightmare on Elm Street nursery rhyme. But before we go into that too much, Will, the cinephile, do you fancy explaining to our non-screenwriting listeners exactly what a pre-lap is and how it works?
Yeah, no problem. So I would generally call this a J cut. I mean, you can get an L cut the other way as well, but basically it means the sound or music from the next scene plays over a portion of the end of the scene we're currently in. So there's an overlap in the audio. And you quite often hear this used with dialogue, but obviously music or a specific sound effect, like maybe a plane coming into land or a hammer striking an anvil, something like that. You can do it with that as well. And you can do this for a number of reasons. So mostly, I guess this is done to help with the flow between scenes. But sometimes you can use it to suggest, a thematic connection or as a way to build tension. And certainly when using sound or music, you'll hear the overlapping sound reach a crescendo at the cut. And with dialogue, you might get a sort of repeated word, that maybe brings a character out of a daydream with a start, for example. So there's some sort of apprehension for the audience, I guess, as well. But it's really effective and used really, really well.
Brilliant. Spot on, my man. And those of you who may not be familiar with the Nightmare nursery rhyme, it's basically a riff on the old one, two, buckle my shoe nursery rhyme, only it starts off one, two, Freddy's coming for you. It's a wonderfully creepy little ditty and will be instantly recognizable by anyone who has heard it before, seen these films, or has any knowledge of Freddy whatsoever.
Yeah, so the nursery rhyme continues into the next scene where a bunch of young girls clad in old school white dresses are playing jump rope while singing. It's a little unnerving, to say the least, as we pan over to Tina and her friends pulling up in a red car. So, are we still in Dreamworld here, Lee? There's no way these kids are real, right?
I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at this, I think. The first is that this is a dream and we're in one of the main characters' sleep state, but I don't think that's the case. It could also be that these kids are just real kids playing jump rope who have heard the nursery rhyme in their heads, but I don't think that's the case either, although this is clearly the case in the script. I think it's a blend of both, sort of meant to show that the dream world and the real world are in some ways becoming indistinguishable and that elements from one can carry into the other. I think if Craven intended them to come off as regular kids, he wouldn't have dressed them in that fashion or shot the skipping scene in slow-mo. But I'd be interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of subliminally, like you say, really, it's just showing us that there can be an overlap between the real world and the dream world somewhere. I think you kind of nailed it with that, really. Anyway, back to the scene, and we meet the rest of Tina's friend group. Her boyfriend Rod, played by Jesu Garcia, her BFF Nancy, played by Heather Langenkamp, and Nancy's boyfriend Glenn, played by a debuting Johnny Depp.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, heard of him from somewhere, right? The teens share some banter, as teens are prone to do. This is a fairly expositional affair, this, Lee, where we find out that Nancy and possibly Glenn also had nightmares last night, which is a little spooky. We also
Mm.
learn Rod to be quite blunt, bit of a twat, but it seems Tina likes a bad boy, and the kids head off to school or wherever it is that Rod goes, whatever it is that he does.
It's a really good introduction scene for the main cast as well. I mean, Tina is obviously spooked. Nancy immediately tries to rationalize things. Rod is just a sweaty heap of macho testosterone, and Glenn is surprisingly supportive. Each character is summed up brilliantly in just that one scene.
Yeah, we get a great flavor for them, don't we? Early doors. Later that night, Nancy and Glenn are staying around Tina's, whose mum is away for a couple of days. There's an amusing moment where Glenn tries to convince his mother over the phone that he's staying at his cousin's by the airport and he's using kind of a boombox and a tape full of sound effects and plane sounds and all that sort of stuff. It does go awry as the tape skips to a car crash, screaming and general chaos, but somehow he's able to convince his truly gullible mother with this shit show. I'm not sure
Yeah, I
how.
mean, the adults in this film are not the most capable bunch, to be sure. And I found this interesting because, if we scratch the surface a little, it's kind of telling us quite bluntly that we can't always trust our senses in this world. We can be deceived and things may not be as they first see or sound.
Yeah, so the conversation moves back to Tina's nightmare, and she goes into a bit more detail here, and it does trigger a memory in Nancy of her own dream. And the two girls describe the same man haunting their dreams. Burnt red and green sweater, hat, and knives for fingers, Lee.
Hmm. Nancy's account of the man is a little bit longer in the script. Have a listen. Nancy, I dreamed about this guy in a dirty red and yellow sweater. I dream in color, He walked into the room I was in, right through the wall like it was smoke or something, and just stared at me, sort of obscenely. Then he walked out through the wall on the other side, like he'd just come to check me out. See, I like this because to me, it insinuates that Freddy is keeping tabs on all his future victims whilst kind of singling out who his next kill is going to be.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? So while talking about the Nightmare Man's clawed glove and the sound it makes when he drags it across hard surfaces, The gang hear an eerily familiar screech from outside the house. And of course, being 80s teenagers in a horror movie, they head outside to investigate, Lee, as you do. Well, the girls make it as far as the porch before sending Glenn out into the dark backyard to investigate. And to the lad's credit, he ventures bravely into the darkness where he's tackled to the ground by a dark figure, Lee, at 9 minutes and 20 seconds. But it's only a fake out. It's just Rod being an asshole. Something a rightly annoyed Glenn comments on, only for Rod, being the utter pecker that he is, to pull a, pull a fucking knife on him, Lee.
Yeah, I have a feeling Rod's days as a knife wielding bad boy will soon come back to haunt him.
Yeah, we can only live in hope, I think, on that one. So a randy Rod bundles Tina away upstairs for some premarital coitus, leaving Nancy and Glenn to their own devices.
Hmm. I think it's worth pointing out at this point that as far as we're aware, as a first-time audience, Tina is likely the protagonist of the film, as she's been in pretty much every scene bar the creation of the glove. Yeah, obviously, anyone with knowledge of the franchise and its lore will know that Nancy is kind of the Laurie Strode to Freddy's Michael Myers. But it's worth remembering that back on its initial release, what's about to happen would have genuinely rocked the hell out of the audience.
Yeah. Nice little moment too, because Nancy denies Glenn some loving here, which suggests, an innocence in Nancy, which maybe Tina doesn't quite possess at this moment. Anyway, Nancy and Glenn lock up the house before retiring for the night. It's a great little moment of safety shot. Of course, they are far from safe, as we're about to learn. A short while later, Glenn is struggling to sleep on the couch downstairs through the sound of Rod and Tina's extremely vocal lovemaking, I would say, up in Tina's mum's room. Thankfully, they've reached the end of their session, and after some brief pillow talk, we learn that Rod too has been having nightmares, Lee. So maybe Rod's not such an insensitive jerk after all.
Seems like a bit of a pre-tragedy character builder to me.
Yeah, I have a sneaky suspicion that you're right there, Lee, but tell us more about this.
Okay, so often in movies and TV, right before a character dies or has a tragic event occur, the writers will have them perform or encounter a moment where they become sympathetic to the audience, Otherwise, who gives a fuck if something bad happens to them, right? It's a bit like the old 2 days from retirement shtick from cop movies.
Mm.
Here we see that Rod is genuinely sweet on Tina and has been having sleep trauma of his own. Also, and I never noticed this before this watch, poor old Rod is huddled up beneath a red and green striped blanket.
Oh, foreshadowing much?
I know, and the only reason I noticed this is that in the script there's a throwaway line from Tina about where he dug out his old red and yellow blanket that he's currently under.
Ah. So we check in on Nancy, who is sleeping soundly in Tina's bed, only for the crucifix mounted on the wall above the bed to fall off the wall, momentarily waking her. She sleepily shrugs it off and quickly nods back off. But back to Tina and Rod now, and the girl is woken by the sound of someone throwing stones at her window. And she looks outside but can't see anyone there. Back to Nancy now, and as she sleeps, a sinister figure pushes through the wall above her head at around the 14-minute mark, but it retreats, perhaps because she still holds the crucifix from earlier.
Okie spooky. So I have a theory about this particular scene.
Nicely, enlighten us.
Okay. In the script, this scene occurs before Tina is woken by the pebbles at her window. So I think that originally Freddy was coming out the wall to get Tina. I mean, this is her room, don't forget. But upon seeing that it's Nancy there instead, he backs out to go and find his original prey. And in my mind, this harkens back to that line that was cut from earlier that I read out in the script where Nancy says about how in her dream, Freddy just walked into her room, checked she was there, and left. Whereas in the film, it's sort of insinuated that maybe the crucifix protected her in some way. And there's also some very subtle theme work at play here. The way Freddy is pushing through the membranous wall kind of insinuates that the barrier between dreams and reality is thin and can be manipulated and broken.
Yeah, man, all good shouts, I think there. I mean, it's interesting because the crucifix thing is not really explored too much in the film, after, is it? It's kind of
Hmm.
there, it sort of seems to get lost somewhere along the way. Anyway, Tina, meanwhile, has moved downstairs and heads out alone into the backyard to investigate whoever keeps whispering her name from the darkness. She's a brave lass, Lee, heading out there half naked and completely unarmed.
Brave is probably not the word that I would use, but each to their own.
Possibly a little foolhardy.
Mhm.
But with no sign of the intruder in the backyard, she heads out into the bordering alleyway. A trash can lid rolls in from the darkness, startling her, Lee.
We've got a little extra in the script here, which was actually filmed but later deleted. A sharp crank of metal, and 50 feet down the alley, the lid of an ash can rolls from the dark like a huge tin coin and spirals noisily down. Great description there. Low reverse across lid to Tina. Despite herself, she comes over and touches it. She comes up with long worms on her fingers. And you can find this deleted scene online or on some of the Blu-ray, DVD, 4K extras. And this goes for several of the deleted scenes we'll talk about throughout the film. So if you're curious about any of them, just punch them into YouTube, or if you've got the Blu-rays or DVDs, just check out the special features and you should be able to catch most of them there.
Yeah, nice. Now it's time to meet the boogeyman, Lee, as from the far end of the alley, cloaked in shadow as he is for most of the film, Freddy Krueger looms in all his hideous glory, and his arms elongate to encompass the entire alley, and there's no way Tina is getting past him as she has to backtrack. She pleads to God, but we get this classic beat in retort. Tina, oh, shit, please, God. Killer, softly approaching. This is God. He holds up his steel-tipped hand like a surgical steel spider. Tina runs for her life. So Tina flees, but Freddy is everywhere, appearing behind her, leaping out from behind trees. He taunts her further by hacking off his own fingers, Lee.
Yeah, in the script, the severed fingers crawl after Tina like little worms before flying back to Freddy's hand and reattaching themselves. And there's a throwaway line from Freddy telling Tina that Nancy can't hear her because she's awake. But this whole finger hacking, chopping thing just kind of proves to stress the fact that Freddy is essentially he's basically immortal in this dream realm. You can chop him up, rip his face off. It's all fun and games. You know, he'll keep coming back. And it's almost time now for Tina to shuffle off the mortal coil, and it's pretty much spot on to how it's written. And here is that classic, iconic scene from the script.
Tina leaps back, sickened, and begins stamping on them as if they were huge bugs. The man snaps up his arm, and the fingers fly back into place on his hand. He leers at Tina, then suddenly lunges at her, sweeping with the cutting hand. Tina's no weak sister, blocks his arm, deflecting the spines, and grabs the man's ugly face with her other hand. But the face only slides off to the bone. The man presses in, and Tina contorts in horror as the knives slash across her shoulder, cutting her deeply. Tina staggers backwards, groaning, her foot now inexplicably caught in bedclothes. She falls over her bed's comforter, twists away from the man, and, like a child, pulls the cover over her. The skull-faced man crushes down, and there's a fierce grappling, punctuated by his grunts and the girl's deafening screams. And they both become totally wrapped in the comforter until they're beneath it, fighting for life and death. Interior, Tina's room, night. Rod lurches up into close-up in the lightless bedroom, half awakened by the tremendous struggle somewhere, somehow inside the dark bed. Rod grabs groggily, lifting the blanket. In his POV, we glimpse the dark underside of the blanket, see two shadowy figures flailing and clawing under the bedspread, Tina and the man, or a shape that could be a man, raging against each other. Rod drops the blanket and leaps from the bed, scared, full awake and terrified. Then the horrible Tina's gasps change to the cries of a terribly wounded victim. Rod instantly jerks back the bedspread. In his POV, we see Tina struggling and flailing along the sheets, the man nowhere in sight. Rod, Tina? Suddenly Tina, eyes turned inward to her tormentor, give an awful jolt, her arms and legs spraddled as if by overwhelming force and pinned to the bed. Next instant, her nightgown flies apart and four long gashes chase across her torso. From no visible instruments, a huge irrigation of blood floods the bed. Terrified, Rod dives for the light, but at the same moment something invisible grabs Tina, wielding her body in the air and bringing it around in a swift blow that knocks Rod crashing into the light, smashing it to bits. Closer on him as he struggles around. In the blue flashes of electricity, Rod sees Tina sliding up the bedroom wall in a dark smear, dragged feet first. Angle on Rod, paralyzed by terror. Angle on Tina's dying eyes, moving with her up the wall and bumping around the corner onto the ceiling. She's just looking at who's dragging her, eyes glazing. Reverse in her POV to the shadowy, horrendously ugly man, dragging her with fierce glee across the ceiling, literally swabbing the ceiling with her bloody body. Seen in forced perspective, the shot carries her across a great distance without seeming to get anywhere, as if the ceiling is an endless plain. Angle down on Rod, on his hands and knees, the lamp next to him blurting blue sparks and strobing the nightmare room. Rod screaming up at Tina's invisible tormentor. Rod, what the hell's going on here? Tina! Angle on Tina, upside down, clawing at the hanging swag lamp above her mother's dressing table, desperate for some anchor. But she's dragged away from it. The lamp swings back, its wires gushing more sparks. Closer along the ceiling as Tina rakes a long furrow in the ceiling with her fingernails, but her eyes are glazing, and then they fall closed. Wide, up on the ceiling, as her body suddenly flops loose, hanging for an awful moment by the feet over the bed. Reverse on Rod, staring like a terrified child. Rod, Tina. Reverse in his POV, as the body falls like a sack of rocks onto the devastated bed, in slow motion, striking with a huge splash of blood. A sick, awful giggle floats around the room, then echoes off into infinity. Rod staggers up, staring around as if hoping to see this phantom.
Wow. I mean, this is such an iconic scene. Fantastic visuals, utter spectacle. And yet it also does a lot of heavy lifting. You know, we confirm what's already been hinted at. What happens in your dreams happens to your body back in the real world. You know, Freddy isn't just a harsh experience, he's a legitimate threat. And we also learn that Tina obviously was not our protagonist. And it's pretty much from this moment that Nancy steps up to bat. I mean, this is literally visible as her and Glenn force their way into the bloody scene of the murder. Glenn immediately backs up, overwhelmed, whereas Nancy quite literally steps up, steps forward, investigative and determined. Now, in the script, this scene plays out a little different. Both Nancy and Glenn misinterpret the sounds from outside as Rod hurting Tina, and when they break in, the room is dark and Nancy slips in the blood. It's a very different vibe, and one I think they handled better on screen for sure, I feel. And I'm also going to put the end of Act One pretty much bang right here.
Yeah, I had the end of Act One here too, dude. I think it's just worth mentioning, how well the practical effects are handled in this scene. I'm pretty sure it's kind of all in camera.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful piece of movie magic, I think. Okay, so we're off to the police station now as we meet Lieutenant Don Thompson, played by the legendary John Saxon. I fucking love seeing John Saxon in a movie, Lee. Anyway, they don't just share a surname. No, he's Nancy's father, and isn't too pleased to hear his daughter was found at the scene of a brutal murder. I mean, who would be? He immediately takes it out on Nancy's dead-eyed mother, Marge, and it seems the two of them are not on great terms.
Just a humorous fact in the script, Marge is listed as Marge Simpson.
Interesting. So the next morning, Marge starts the morning with a refreshing gin while Nancy, against her mother's wishes, heads off to school. She's desperate to keep busy so she can avoid sleep, even though she doesn't yet know the full extent of what awaits her in the dreamscape. On her way to school, she spots the most sus-looking dude imaginable watching her. And when she looks back, the man is Gonley. Only now Rod looms in from the bushes and drags her off. Now, once out of sight, he releases her and she interrogates him over the night's events. He swears he didn't do it, Lee, but becomes threatening and aggressive when she questions his story.
Yeah, way to not act like a dick, Rod.
Yeah, well, his temper once again isn't doing him any favors as Lieutenant Thompson sweeps in, gun raised, and arrests him. Seems he's pretty good at this whole police malarkey, Lee, and was following his daughter in case Rod made contact. Now, Rod makes a break for it, and Lieutenant Thompson is about to drop the perp when Nancy leaps in the way. Thankfully, a fleet of cop cars are also waiting nearby. Did we mention Nancy's dad is really good at his job, Lee? I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
mentioned. And Rod is taken into custody.
Nice. And there's some really great character beats here. Besides Nancy's capable father, Nancy is again painted as the investigative force, questioning Rod without any real sense of accusation. Rod is still a quick-tempered jackass, resorting to threats and intimidation when he is challenged. He's an asshole, but at least he's true to character. And then you've got Nancy literally throwing herself in front of a potential bullet to save Rod. Now, I mean, odds on her dad wasn't going to shoot her, but that's still a pretty ballsy move, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty ballsy, isn't it? I think Nancy's shaping up to be a far better final girl than poor Tina at this point, I
Yeah.
think. So we rejoin Nancy a little later in school, where she, like every other teenager in the modern world, is in danger of being put to sleep by learning about Shakespeare.
Ugh.
Indeed.
I did perk up at this scene because Nancy's teacher is none other than Lynn Shay, herself a verified Scream Queen and probably best known to horror fans as Elise Rainier in the Insidious franchise.
Mm.
So, in my head, and I know this totally isn't canon, but this teacher is a young Elise preparing for her own face off with Freddy. What a movie that would have been!
I've not really dipped my toes into the Insidious franchise, Lee. Is it recommended viewing, do you think?
All except the last one, the Red Door. I was most disappointed in that one, but the others, mwah, excellent.
Oh. Maybe I'll have a look someday. And Nancy becomes aware of something off. A bloodied Tina clad in a body bag, whispering to her from the corridor at the 24-minute mark. Certainly seems off to me, that Lee.
I like that. Something off. Yeah, I'd label that as considerably more than something off. But interestingly, the quote being recited here by the classmate is also wonderfully appropriate. It's from Hamlet and goes, "Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams." And this quote kind of talks about how Hamlet is happiest in his own head. He's a dreamer and would be happy there if not for his nightmares. And you could also argue that it's something of an analogy for Freddy. He is trapped in an ethereal realm where he has godlike powers, but through fate or desire, he is driven to create living nightmares.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lee. I think this is a really good example of sort of choosing a quote or choosing to quote something that, adds kind of thematic depth.
Yeah.
This isn't a random sort of quote just for the sake of it.
Mm,
It says something about the
yeah.
characters. And also, dude, I mean, fucking Shakespeare. I mean, a tad inaccessible for me sometimes, but I mean, he had some writing chops. It just
Can't take that
that
away from the guy.
human nature and sort of psychology, and I think it's
Mm,
like him and Dostoevsky. They sort of, they corner the market on that, I think.
mm.
Anyway, that said, Nancy heads into the corridor to investigate and follows Tina's bloody corpse as it's dragged through the school. Nancy runs through the corridors in pursuit and runs smack bang into a young female hall monitor wearing a red and green sweater. The two exchange harsh words before Nancy runs off in pursuit of Tina. The hall monitor calls after her in Freddy's voice, and now where's his glove, Lee? The music is building. There's a wind blowing and leaves flittering, and we're fully into the dreamscape here.
It's really interesting because Craven even writes these musical changes into the script. Obviously he has writer-director privilege in that, but he's literally building these scenes with a mind to when and where the music is going to hit. Let me read this for you quick. Reverse angle at the door as Nancy runs up. Nancy turns to check out the hall guard. She's vanished. Nancy turns and looks down through the open door. The music sweeps through a strange, brooding movement of strings, mounting towards the nightmare theme. Brilliant.
Yeah. So Nancy makes her way downstairs, past the no students sign, and into the basement where she finds herself in Freddy's boiler room. She's still calling for her friend as Freddy stalks her from the shadows.
And it's worth noting that the script still just refers to him as man or the killer at this point. Even though we've heard the nightmare rhyme before now, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, he won't be officially christened in the script for a fair while just yet.
Freddy confronts Nancy, slicing open his own chest to reveal rot and maggots before chasing her to a dead end.
And this is another great character beat for Nancy. So let's take it straight from the script.
She presses her back to the wet bricks. There's no hope of fighting him off, and Nancy is not as strong as Tina. But she is smart as hell and thinking even in this nightmare. So by the time the creep has raised his knives to strike, Nancy has realized something. She wheels and shoves her arm against one of the scalding steam pipes. In the same split second we hear her flesh scald, we cut to interior English class, day. Nancy lurches up screaming, arm raised to ward off the invisible blow, books clattering to the floor. Other girls nearby scream in surprise as she stumbles over them. Then she stops, confused and groggy from the nightmare. Wider angle. Everybody is staring at Nancy as if she's gone mad. The English teacher rushes over, herself frightened by the terror in the girl's eyes. Yeah, like that line. Nancy may not be as strong as Tina, but she's a lot smarter. And when you have no chance of overpowering your hunter, those brains are going to be your best hope, I think.
Definitely. I mean, Freddie has a line of dialogue here that isn't in the script. Nancy too, in fact, she's screaming that this is just a dream, while our favorite disfigured slasher purrs, "Come to Freddie."
So the unnerved teacher tries to soothe Nancy, but she's half out the door and headed home. There's a great bit of kind of subtle comedy here. The teacher mutters that she'll need a hall pass after she's already left. Outside the school, Nancy struggles to control her emotions, and we notice before she does that she's sporting a raw burn mark on her arm, right where she burnt herself in the dream. And once again, you can see her putting two and two together here. And this is further shown in the very next scene where she visits Rod in jail. Again, she's questioning him, trying to understand every angle. Maybe it's from having a cop as a father, but, this kid is switched only. She wants to believe Rod, but the evidence just isn't there until he mentions Tina being slashed by 4 blades at once and about the nightmare he had the night before about a man with knives for fingers.
In the script, we get an extra scene before this one with Nancy convincing her father to let her speak to Rod. There's not really a lot to it, so it's easy to see why it was cut. And there's a cool little detail I noticed here, because in the film, Rod has bloody knuckles. And my first thought was that maybe he still hadn't washed from when Tina was killed, but that didn't really make sense. But on reading the script, though, there's a moment in the scene where Rod gets frustrated and takes out his aggression by punching the wall.
Yeah, really interesting. Do you have any thoughts on why they took that out?
I think the next time we see Rod, he's not going to be in a very good predicament. So I'd imagine Craven wanted us to be leaning a bit more on the compassionate side to him, the pre-tragedy sympathy moment. Hence why we have him racked with guilt in this scene over his inability to save Tina. I think having him hulk out and punch the wall near a timid, inquisitive Nancy probably wouldn't have had that effect.
Yeah, I think you're right, dude. I mean, we have to have some empathy for this asshat at some point, or who cares, right? But we rejoin Nancy back home and relaxing in a bubble bath, and she's singing the nightmare nursery rhyme as she dozes off. Really not a good sign. No sooner has she finished the rhyme and seemingly slipped into the land of Nod when that familiar gloved hand emerges from the bath right between her legs at the 32-minute point. And if you want to talk about iconic imagery, this scene is way up there for a reason. First, there's the obvious psychosexual inference, but more so it highlights Nancy and by effect Freddy's victims being completely and utterly vulnerable to the evil force that's preying upon them.
Good shout. I mean, interesting side note here. I was chatting to my wife, as I'm prone to do on occasion, and she mentioned how when I was researching this episode, she kept hearing the nightmare theme playing. And she said it just gave her trauma flashbacks to when she was a kid and too afraid to put bubbles in the bath because of this scene. So it's definitely an iconic one.
Yeah, classic. Okay, thankfully Nancy is awakened by her mother warning her not to fall asleep or she might drown in the tub. Nancy replies how all teenagers would, with mockery and a rolling of the eyes, and she's straight back to sleep again, Lee.
This scene is wonderfully written in the script. Check it out. Reverse,
across to her legs, crooked, one knee on the other side of the tub. There's a ripple in the water between. Then something tiny and shiny breaks the surface between them. It pops up with a slithering music cue and catches a slither of light. Then it begins to rise. Higher and higher it rises, soon accompanied by another, then two more shining, gleaming blades, and then the full glove and dark, hairy hand, and then the wrist and arm, straight up like an evil sapling between the girl's knees. The knives blossoming into a bright flower of razor-sharp steel in the air, moving over the girl's belly. The hand rears back, the claws arch to strike. Yeah, pretty good that, Lee. Now, back in the film, and there's no subtlety this time. Nancy is grabbed and dragged down under the water into a seemingly endless void. Thankfully, she's able to drag herself out to safety just as Marge jimmies the lock on the door with a coat hanger. Get in, Marge. A flustered Nancy brushes it off as her tripping getting out of the bath. Now, as Marge leaves, Nancy locks the door again and retrieves some stay-awake pills from the medicine cupboard.
As if a locked door would keep Marge out, you know. I mean, also that made me laugh. The pills are literally called stay awake pills, which I find amusing.
Well, keep it simple, you know.
Yeah. We get an additional scene in the script as Marge escorts Nancy to bed and feeds her a sleeping pill, which the girl spits out the moment her mother leaves and pops a stay awake pill instead. And this is a really important plot point because Nancy has pretty much figured out now that falling asleep may well kill her, but she's purely on the defensive at the moment. She's not 100% convinced yet, and as yet has no way to fight back.
In the next scene, Nancy is reading and watching a movie to try and stay awake.
Not just any movie, but Sam Raimi's Evil Dead. And this would spark a friendly series of acknowledgements between the two, with Freddy's glove appearing in the background of Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? Her efforts to stay awake are proving difficult, and she heads to the window for some air, only for Glenn to pop in out of nowhere. Despite being startled, Nancy isn't too perturbed, so it seems this is a semi sort of regular occurrence. Glenn makes himself at home and the two share their thoughts on what's been happening. And it's here that Nancy asks Glenn to help her with something. She wants to go and look for someone or something, and she needs him to keep watch.
Again, this is another great beat for Nancy. You know, she's determined to find a way out of her predicament, and she's brave enough to try something that may well be incredibly dangerous for her.
Yeah. Now, the next time we see her, she is creeping out the front door of her house into the night. She calls for Glenn, who is hiding behind a tree nearby. And with Glenn in place, Nancy heads down a dark and decidedly ominous alley at around the 38-minute and 30-second mark. There's a lot of ladies walking down ominous alleys in this movie so far, isn't there? She heads through a broken door and finds herself at the police station. She checks through a window and sees Rod fast asleep, but Freddy is looming over him, Lee. She calls for Glenn, but there's no answer. Freddy can hear her, though, and he doesn't look happy at being interrupted. We see Tina again, and she's had better days, Lee. She's got bugs crawling out of her mouth and eels slithering around. It's not pretty at all.
Not pretty.
Nancy tries to make her way back home, but Freddy is in hot pursuit, stalking her from the shadows.
So in the script, this chase scene is longer and more drawn out, including one moment where Nancy finds herself caught in wet cement from which she struggles to wade free.
It's got a bit of the Naked Gun kind of comedy chase vibe, doesn't it? Anyway, it seems they repurposed this somewhat as once Nancy reaches the semi-safety of her house and flees upstairs, the stairs turn into gloop and she struggles to mount them as Freddy smashes his way through the door. Now, she manages to get to her room where Glenn is fast asleep, the twat. But if we weren't already clued in on what's happening here, this should give us enough clues to fill in the blanks, Lee. Nancy tries to wake herself, insisting that it's all a dream and he isn't real, but Freddy then crashes through the door and the two grapple for her life. A feather pillow is slashed, creating a delightful storm of white feathers for them to battle against. But thankfully, it seems Nancy had a backup in place. An alarm clock rings and she wakes screaming.
Clever girl.
Indeed, clever girl. And the first thing she does is rightfully chew Glenn out before noticing a single feather, and her mind snaps back to Rod. Now, her and Glenn race to the police station where Nancy's plea to see Rod is intercut with shots of his blanket slowly wrapping itself around his neck at the 43-minute and 30-second mark. Finally, Nancy convinces her father to check on the boy, but it's too late. Rod is dragged kicking and screaming to the barred window where he's hung. And by the time backup arrives, it's too late.
Mm. There's a few extra tidbits of dialogue in the script, but nothing important is lost.
Yeah, and in the very next scene, we're at poor Rod's funeral.
So I went off on a little tangent adventure here. And according to my old buddy Google, the average time between death and burial in 1980s America for a suicide would be 5 to 14 days. So unless Nancy's stay awake game has achieved like god tier levels, the Elm Street authorities must have rushed the hell out of that funeral. Either that or Freddy gave Nancy and Glenn, a little respite in between. There's also a moment here where who is assumably Rod's dad gives Lieutenant Thompson a very deliberate look. It could be he blames him for his son's death, or maybe, just maybe, there's something deeper going on here.
Well, the funeral goes off without a hitch, despite the abiding minister kind of insinuating that Rod was either a dick or an irreligious dick and got what he deserved. Nancy heads off with her mother, but not before telling her and her father about the burnt man with the red and green sweater and the hat with knives for fingers, and I'll be a monkey if that doesn't hit home with them both. Marge declares that she's taking Nancy to get professional help.
That before this moment, we get an extra scene in the script that absolutely removes any doubt that Nancy's folks know more than they are letting on.
Marge, I don't think she's slept since Tina died, shakes her head. She's always been a delicate kid. Thompson lights her cigarette, attempting some sort of nonchalance. Lieutenant Thompson, she's tougher than you think. Any idea how she knew Rod was going to kill himself? Marge, no. All I know is this reminds me too much of 10 years ago. Thompson blows a plume of smoke against the hard sky and looks away. Lieutenant Thompson, yeah, well, let's not start digging up bodies just because we're in a cemetery. He gives her a look that could cut stone. Marge tosses her cigarette and crosses to Nancy. The girl is simply staring off over the valley. Marge, very gently, time to go home, baby. She moves her away from the brink of the hill. So why remove this, do you think, Lee?
I'd say it's pretty much because I think, as we mentioned earlier, it directly incriminates Nancy's parents into something. It lets us know something has happened that they're responsible for.
Yeah, it's maybe a bit early for that, right?
Yeah, I think so. And in the script here, we get another burn-in superimposed, which quite handily fills in the blanks to how many days have passed since Tina's first nightmare. And the answer, that being the 5th day. So it's 5 days that have passed. So no, they didn't waste a goddamn second in putting Rod in the ground. And I'm assuming Tina too.
Yeah, almost like they had some practice burying kids, am I right?
Yeah, Elm Street is definitely not the best place to start a family, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, true to her word, or at least her intention, we find Marge has taken Nancy to the Sleep Institute, where she's being wired up to a sleep monitor by a doctor and a nurse. Nancy asks if they can't just give her a pill to stop her dreaming, but is told by the doctor that we have to dream or we'll go crazy. And crazy seems like a better option right now, to be honest. But Nancy agrees to trust them and settles down to sleep.
Yeah. Again, we get some extra dialogue in the script, but we're not missing anything important.
Yeah, just a slight tangent. I mean, I don't really remember any dreams, Lee, do you?
Oh, mate, that depends. I vividly remember a nightmare from when I must have been probably 5, and I remember that with raw, terrifying clarity. And that dream fucked me up for a long time.
Oh
And I
dear.
also remember my all-time favorite dream, which was when myself and Optimus Prime fought together to survive in a world ravaged by a zombie apocalypse. We were kind of like a badass buddy cop movie. It was
Yeah.
absolutely great.
Fantastic. Anyway, Marge and the doctor monitor Nancy as she sleeps, and for a short while, all seems well.
Yeah, and don't forget the hot nurse who incidentally was married to Wes Craven at the time. And again, we get some additional dialogue in the script, including this interesting little number.
Marge, what the hell are dreams anyway? Dr. King, mysteries, incredible body hocus pocus. Truth is, we still don't know what they are or where they come from. As for nightmares, leans closer. Did you know that in the last 3 years, 20 Filipino refugees in California died in the middle of nightmares? Not from heart attacks either, they just died.
So the reason I point this out is that part of Craven's original inspiration for the film and for Freddy came from the genuine unexplained deaths of a group of Hmong refugees, and it came to be known as sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, or SUNDS.
Mhm.
And there were other more specific influences for Freddy, but we'll talk about those probably in the actual face-off episode itself.
So it seems Nancy's dreaming along nicely now, as the doctor handily informs us a nightmare would read as a 5 or a 6, and she's sailing by on threes. That doesn't last long though, as Nancy starts to thrash and screamly, and the monitor peaks at 30 dpms.
DPMS.
Yeah, dreams per millisecond? I don't know, dude. Anyway, I wasn't expecting you to call me on that, to be honest.
Sorry.
Anyway, the doctor rushes to Nancy's bedside and they manage to wake her, only to find that she now has white streaks in her hair. Her arm is badly lacerated, and weirdest of all, she has Freddy's hat in her hand. And she tells them that she grabbed it off his head before waking.
Yeah, you can kind of hear the pieces falling into place in Nancy's mind now, as well as you can see the horror in Marge's eyes. And there's a couple of cool beats from this scene in the script that I just want to spend a moment on. And first, we get another example of Craven working music into the scene on the page that goes like this. The needle of the graph gives a jagged pitch up, plunges, then surges well above the 8 mark. A strange music cue, dissonant and threatening, creeps in. The nightmare theme slurred into awful minors and weird dissonance. King stares at the gauge in disbelief, rapping his finger on its glass. And then we get this POV from Nancy, which didn't make it into the film.
Interior, sleeping room. The doctor and Marge come in on the run. Nancy's flailing and screaming as if the devil himself were after her. King grabs her to shake her awake. Angle on Nancy, eyes open, looking in terror, sound echoed strangely. In her POV, dressed in King's clothes, the horribly scarred man reaches out. Wider, Nancy's eyes closed in sleep, as the girl's fist shoots out with incredible force and knocks Dr. King flying. The nurse and Marge both descend on her, and again, in her sleeping POV, we see the man stagger for her. Wider on Nancy, still in her nightmare, fighting like a tiger with both Marge and the nurse, sending the nurse sprawling, leaving Marge hanging on for dear life. Angle on the stunned doctor, fumbling with a hypodermic needle, spilling most of the stuff on himself with his shaking hands. The screams and curses of Nancy are deafening and worthy of a stevedore fighting off his worst enemy. Stranger still, her hair is electrified, standing on end and greying before their very eyes. Marge screams at the top of her lungs. So the next morning, Nancy is back at home and eavesdropping on a phone call between her parents, discussing the hat. Now, Marge claims to have thrown it away, but Nancy sees through the ruse and grabs the hat from the drawer where it was stashed. And she tells her he even has the killer's name written in it, Fred Krueger Lee.
Hey. Now, this is the first time the killer's name has been stated aloud, beside Freddy kind of referring to himself and the nightmare rhyme. And it's on page 62 of the script. Also, I love the idea of Freddy writing his name in his hat. You know, it harkens me back to my school days when you'd write your name on your clothes label in case the aforementioned article went astray or was more likely nicked.
Hmm. So Marge is adamant that Nancy just needs a good night's sleep, and Nancy has had enough and berates her boozy mother enough to receive a stinging bitch slap from Marge.
I'm telling you, man, old Marge, don't fuck about.
Marge finally begins to open up and tells Nancy that Fred Krueger can't be coming after her because he's dead. And the fact that her mother knew about him all this time and didn't say anything is enough to enrage Nancy to the point she smashes Marge's booze and storms out the house. Nancy meets up with Glenn and he tells her about the Balinese dream skills.
Yeah, this is like a critically important beat. So here is how it's written on the page.
He stops, seeing the look on Nancy's face. Our zoom is much closer now, a wide medium, and still coming in on the kids. Nancy. And what if they meet a monster in their dream? Then what? Glenn. They turn their back on it. Grins hopefully. Takes away its energy and it disappears. Nancy. What happens if they don't do that? Glenn. Shrugs. I guess those people don't wake up to tell what happens. Nancy. Great. This is followed up by Glenn noticing the book Nancy is reading, Booby Trap and Improvised Anti-Personnel Devices. Nancy quips that she's into survival league.
Yeah. So this one scene does a huge amount of legwork for the film. First of all, it gives Nancy information vital to her defeating Freddy in the film's climax. And secondly, it shows that Nancy herself is starting to shift out of the victim role. I mean, she literally says it herself in a line dripping with meaning and subtext. I'm into survival.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nancy returns home to find the doors and windows have all been barred.
Yeah. But there's a little extra information in the script here, which is kind of important. So have a listen.
Marge appears and hands a check to the foreman of the crew, a white guy in clean overalls and a gold chain. He scrutinizes it. Foreman. And the other? Marge forks over a wad of cash, hands trembling in her half-drunk, helpless rage. Marge. Where's your mask and gun? The foreman counts the money swiftly. Foreman. Don't bust my chops, lady. If the city found out I put him in without inside releases, I'd lose my license. He shoves the money in his pocket and climbs in his truck. Marge exits frame for her house. Pan with the truck as it pulls away. Then pick up Nancy, walking across the street from the corner, alone, dispirited. She lifts her eyes to her home and stops in her tracks. Nancy. Oh, gross. Widening to reveal the house as Nancy walks across her front yard. Every single window has been covered with brand new ornamental iron bars bolted deeply into their frames.
Nice. So from this little additional exchange in the script, we learn that these bars have been installed illegally and with no internal release, meaning Nancy's house is now quite literally a prison. And they've also ripped down the trellis, so Glenn no longer has free access to her bedroom, not that he'd be able to get through the bars anyway. And this is just one of many parental fails throughout the movie, mostly, but not entirely on poor Marge's end. You know, as we mentioned earlier, the only parent who is even remotely capable in this film is Nancy's father. And I do often wonder how different the movie would be if she lived with him rather than her mother. You know, and I'm not shitting on Marge here, you know, at least not totally, because that woman terrifies me, basically. But she's doing her best, I think, in a tough situation. It's just that her best
kind of sucks.
To put it bluntly, yeah.
Now, Nancy heads inside to confront her mother, who, rather than argue, leads Nancy down into the cellar, promising to tell her everything. Oh, hello, hello, hello. That sounds like the random page check buzzer, Lee.
Indeed, it does.
Yeah, so basic screenwriting law states that 1 page equals 1 minute of screen time. There's some variance here, obviously, but the rule usually sort of tends to hold weight. But this, my friends, is where we randomly put that rule to the test. So tell me, my studio sidekick, where do we stand?
Okay, so we are at around the 56.5-minute mark in the film, and we are on page 68 of the script.
So that's around like a 12-page discrepancy. Any thoughts on that, Lee?
Yeah. I mean, we've had quite a bit of snip dialogue. We've had a couple of cutscenes or two, and the formatting in this version of the script isn't great. There are points where there's a page break after only a few action lines or half a page. So I think if I were to discount all of those, I think we're probably closer to only a couple of pages variance.
Okay, not too unfeasible then. Okay, let's get back to the film.
Okay, I'm going to give you this scene as it is on the page. It's basically the same, but there's a lot more detail in it and a few good talking points. It's a long one, so strap in.
Interior, Nancy's cellar. Marge drags Nancy headlong down the cellar stairs and across the room with a crazy fury, twisting her down near the foundation. and she thrusts her face so close to her daughter's that Nancy reels from the alcohol. Marge, you want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child killer who got at least 20 kids. Kids from our area, kids we all knew. It drove us all crazy when we didn't know who was doing it, but it was even worse when they caught him. Marge draws herself up with a shake. Marge continued. Oh, lawyers got fat and the judge got famous, but someone forgot to sign the search warrant in the right place and Fred Krueger was free, just like that. Nancy, so he's still alive? Marge smiles grimly. Marge, he wouldn't have stopped. The bastard would have got more kids first chance he got. They found nearly 10 bodies in his boiler room as it was, but the law couldn't touch him. At the mention of boiler room, Nancy gives a shake. Marge misses this, too busy taking a pull on the bottle that's never left her hand. Marge continued. What was needed was some private citizens willing to do what had to be done. She reels slowly, looking at Nancy in defiance. Nancy, hushed. What did you do, Mother? Marge cradles the bottle. Marge, a bunch of us parents tracked him down after they let him go. Found him in an old boiler room, just like before. Saw him lying there in that caked red and yellow sweater he always wore, drunk and asleep, with his weird knives by his side. Nancy, dreading it. Go on. Marge reaches over and taps a dusty 2-gallon jug of gasoline near the lawnmower. Marge, we poured gasoline all around the place, left a trail out the door, locked the door, then... She mimed striking a match. Marge continued. Whoosh. Her arms shoot up and her eyes go wide with the light of that fire. There's an awe in her voice. Then she drops her arms. Marge continued, hushed, remembering. But just when it seemed not even the devil could live in there anymore, he crashed out like a banshee, all on fire, swinging those finger knives every which direction, screaming he was going to get us by killing all our kids. She stops with a sudden quake and drinks for a long moment. But the intake doesn't hide the image. Her face bathed in tears, she looks at her daughter and shakes her head. Marge continued. There were all these men, Nancy, even your father. Oh yes, even him. But none could do what had to be done. Krueger rolling and screaming so loud the whole state could hear. No one could take your father's gun and kill him good and proper except me. She sweeps her hand across the air in a terrific slash, then stops, her hand shaking, her voice hoarse and terrified. She looks at her daughter begging. Marge continued. So he's dead, Nan. He can't get you. Mummy killed him. For someone who started this film at a very young 17, Nancy's now the battle-tempered veteran as she takes her mother in her arms and rocks her. Nancy, who was there? Were Tina's parents there? Were Rod's? Marge sags back. Marge, sure, and Glenn's, all of us. But that's in the past now, baby. Really, it's over, slyly. We even took his knives. The woman twists around and opens a door on an old furnace, a furnace unused since the newer gas one nearby was put in. She fishes inside the cavity, and then we hear a touch of the familiar scritch. Next moment she pulls out an object wrapped in rags, opens it and displays the long, rusted blades and their glove-like apparatus. Marge continued. See? Nancy stares at the damn things, chilled. Nancy, all these years you've kept those things buried down here, in our own house? Marge continued. Proof that he's declawed. As for him, we buried him good and deep. Marge shoves the knives into their hiding place, closes the little iron door. Marge continued. So it's okay, you can sleep. She lurches up and staggers upstairs.
Right. So let's break this down a little. So in the script, we get a lot more details about Krueger's demise. Those familiar with the film and the lore will already know a lot of it, but the script gives us more. It was Marge who pulled the trigger and ended Freddy after they set him on fire. Mate, I told you, Marge don't fuck about. We also learn that Freddy isn't just after Nancy and her friends for shits and giggles. You know, this is personal. This is revenge. You know, he is in some ways the ramification of mob justice. By taking law into their own hands, you know, completely understandably, these parents created something far worse and put their kids in a far greater peril. And now this part isn't in the script, but in a deleted scene cut from this confession, we learn that Nancy, Tina, and the others once had siblings who fell victim to Freddy's blades when he was still alive. So all this extra information, it makes for some pretty interesting timelines. So Freddy was killed by the parents according to the script around 10 years previous. And assuming I'm correct about when the film is set, that would put it around 1971. So the original film, despite being released in 1984, is widely believed to be set in 1981. Now, this is where it gets a bit confusing. So most online sources state that Nancy is 15 during the events of the film, but the script clearly states that she is 17 years old. This could have been altered for the film, but it kind of led me down something of a rabbit hole as I tried to figure out the answer to this question, and I probably wasted way too much time on it. But I'm going to assume that the main friend group, Nancy, Tina, Glenn, are all around the same age. Rod strikes me as maybe being slightly older. The fact that we see Tina and Rod having sex kind of steers me away from them being 15, 16, as that'd be us watching a significant minor having sex, which even in the 80s seems a little bit iffy. So I looked briefly into the age of consent laws in America, and that is not a rabbit hole you ever want to go down. And another reason why a writer's search history is probably the most likely thing to ever put them in jail. But from what I can gather, it is 18 in California where the film is shot, and it has been for quite a while. So even 17 is pushing the envelope, but not to the same degree, I'd imagine. And another factor is that Glenn drives a car. So in California, when the film was made, the teen licensing system in place from October 1983 allowed a learner's permit before full licensing, but a teen had to be at least 16 to obtain a driver's license. And this was pretty much the case beforehand, too. So while most online sources state the kids are 15, and there could be stuff in later films I'm not recalling, so please all feel free to correct me. I genuinely want to know. I'm going to come down in favor of them all being 17 years old. Like I say, I'm sure there are some nightmare experts out there who can prove me wrong, and if so, hit me up. I am keen to learn, and I'd love to chat with you all about this horror nerd shit. And that was how I spent my Friday afternoon.
Yeah, no doubt it was time well spent, Lee. Very good. So, with the full horror of Kruger's backstory now in the open, Nancy calls Glenn and tells him about her plan. He's to meet her on the porch at midnight and then watch her while she sleeps so he can wake her at the key moment and she can pull Freddy out of the dream and wham, they'll clock him, call the cops and arrest him, and all live happily ever after. All Glenn has to do until that point is not fall asleep.
I'm genuinely dying to know how the legality of arrest would work in that situation.
Yeah, it would raise some interesting questions, I feel.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Mad Marge would probably see he has an unfortunate accident on his way to the jail.
So Glenn's mum checks in on him a short time later, and wouldn't you know it, the little fucker has already fallen asleep, Lee.
Before this, in the script, we get a brief scene of Nancy's dad checking in at the police station and Glenn's parents talking downstairs. There's nothing of real import here, and the scene with Glenn's parents does occur just slightly later in the film.
Marge settles Nancy down to sleep, but the minute she is out of the room, Nancy is up and retrieves a hidden coffee maker from under the bed before getting dressed and readying herself for battle. Glenn's parents are watching Nancy's window from across the street, and his father, it seems, has had enough of Nancy's antics and doesn't want her hanging around with Glenn anymore.
Yeah, there's an important snippet in the script here as well.
Interior, Nancy's room, night. Close on Nancy's face, very close. Her eyes stare ahead, red-rimmed, anxious. She picks absently at the thick bandage covering her forearm. The long cuts from Fred Krueger's fingers are bleeding again, but she doesn't even care anymore. Too late to sweat the small stuff. She crosses the room.
So this has significance because it is the first time Fred Krueger is referred to by name in the action lines of the script. His first official line of names dialogue is rocking up in a minute.
Nancy tries to sneak downstairs to meet Glenn, but finds her way blocked by a gin-swigging Marge. Frustrated, she tries to phone Glenn, but wouldn't you know it, the little jackass is asleep again, and his parents won't let her speak to him over the phone, telling her to wait until morning. I thought Glenn's dad was quite funny in this, in this moment. As as Nancy begins to panic, the phone rings. She picks it up, but all she can hear is the telltale screech of Freddy's claws on metal. She rips the phone out of the wall and then curses her stupidity. She's about to leave when the phone rings again, despite being essentially cut off and powerless. She answers, and Freddy tells her that he's her boyfriend now and gives her some unwanted tongue action by sticking his tongue through the receiver.
So check this scene out as written because it's important for a couple of reasons.
Back on Nancy, she starts to shake. She goes to the telephone as we widen, unwraps it as it rings even louder. She's shaking so hard now she can barely manage to lift the receiver. Moving close on her so we can hear her teeth chattering as she brings the phone to her ear. Nancy continued, "Hello?" The unmistakable voice of Fred Krueger comes over the phone, garbled by time and unknown dimensions, but clear enough. Krueger, filter, triumphant. "I'm your boyfriend now." Close on the mouthpiece, it's changed from a normal telephone mouthpiece to an actual mouth, Fred Krueger's mouth, and his long, slick tongue flicks out and darts into the startled girl's mouth.
Okay, so the reason I flagged this is that this is the first time in the script that Fred Krueger gets his own labeled dialogue. Before this, he's always been the man, the killer, etc. So this seemingly minor scene actually has huge significance in the history of horror. And this scene is also kind of my main gripe with this movie, as it kind of breaks its own rules. You know, Freddy is manipulating Nancy's reality when she isn't asleep. However, I figure there are a few possible reasons for this. So, number one, as I'm sure you've all heard me say before, never let reality get in the way of a good story. So it could just be that it was a really cool scene and they wanted to put it in. Number two, it could be that Nancy's nodded off just before the phone call, but I don't really buy this though, because Craven has been up until this point very clear about showing who is awake or asleep, even if the revelation comes a little later in the story. And at no point do we see Nancy nod off or wake up around this time. And number three, this kind of ties into the whole ending of the film, and it kind of undoes everything that's happened, but it could be that the whole film is just a dream and Freddy has been in control the whole time. So, answers on a postcard, folks. Again, I'd love to hear your perspective on this one.
Desperate to save Glenn, Nancy tries the front door, but a very drunk Marge has locked the house up tight and hidden the key. With no way of waking him, it's Glenn's time to dance with Freddy as the narcoleptic nipper is pulled down into his bed, only for a literal geyser of blood to vomit out, covering the room in gore at the 1 hour, 8 minute, and 30-second mark.
I mean, this is somehow even more gruesome in the script. Check it out.
Next moment, the young man's body is dragged straight down into the bed, as if some huge beast had grabbed him and heaved him down. His feet and his arms shoot up. There's another hauling jank, and the boy disappears except for his hands and fingers, down into the pit in the middle of the bed. His hands are last to go, clawing for a hold, but soon they vanish as well, dragging blankets and bed sheets, wires and stereo across the caved-in bed and into the abyss. There's hideous screeching of music jamming in with Glenn's echoing screams, then an unholy sudden silence. Next moment, what's left of Glenn is vomited up from the pit of the nightmare bed, a horrible mess of blood and bone and hair and wires, streaming out and over the bed. Then the pit in the bed is gone as if it were never there.
Nice. Again, there is a very brief deleted clip of a bloodied Glenn sliding up out of the bed if you want to sort of search it up online. In the script, then we get another burn-in superimposed reading The Ninth Day. And also, I'm going to put the start of Act 3 here, man. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I had it here too, dude. Yeah. So the very next scene is all cops and ambulances as Lieutenant Thompson arrives at Glenn's house. And the term bloodbath has never been more appropriate, I feel here, Lee.
It's one of my favorite lines here from a guy outside. It's not in the script, but it's great. The ambulance guys are pulling up, and the guy's like, "You don't need a stretcher, you need a mop."
Yeah, for a sensitive soul, I think there. A browbeaten Lieutenant Thompson spots Nancy in her window, and she's quick to call him up. She makes a deal with him. She'll go to sleep and find Krueger if he promises to kick the door down and be waiting in 20 minutes. He agrees, but he's clearly just blowing her off, so she'll go and get some sleep and he can do his job. To his credit, though, he does post a cop to keep watch on her house, just in case anything strange goes down, so he's not totally useless. We then get a great little montage of Nancy setting booby traps around the house.
Yeah, this is a great moment of empowerment. Nancy is reclaiming her home. It's no longer going to serve as a prison for her. It's going to become a cage for Freddy. And I've only recently kind of come to this conclusion, but I think Nancy Thompson is hands down the greatest final girl in cinematic history.
Interesting. So elaborate on that for us, Lee.
Okay, so I'll be honest, I've often overlooked the Nightmare movies because its sequels are either great or just awful, and there's not really any middle ground. And I feel I've kind of slept on Nancy in particular, but she does pretty much everything right. If you think about it, from the moment of Tina's murder, she's inquisitive, she's investigating, she's trying to learn as much as possible about what is happening. She doesn't put her head in the sand. She learns that sleep is dangerous, so she tries her best to stay awake and learns the most effective ways to do so. But even then, she knows that this is a temporary respite. She has to sleep eventually. So then she discovers that she can bring things out of her dream. And from this point on, she begins to formulate a plan which puts her in extreme danger, but one that she does not shirk from, not for a second. She educates herself on how best to fight back. Her plans are thwarted time and time again by her mother, by Glenn, ultimately by her father, but she adapts, overcomes, and she fights on anyway. And I think that's the key difference between her and any of the other classic final girls. She actively hunts Freddy down. She's not trying to escape. She's not hiding. She wants that motherfucker and she's going to take him down, even if it kills her, which tragically it will, but not for a couple of movies yet. It would take like 40 years before Laurie Strode, for example, adopted this mindset and found this courage.
Yeah, it's a great point. So the stage is almost set for the showdown of the century, Lee. We check in quickly with Lieutenant Thompson, who, like his peers, is completely speechless at the condition of Glenn's body.
Yeah, and this is a great example of a reaction shot. So yeah, you could have shown us the bloody remains of Glenn's body, but just going off the reactions of these hardened police officers makes it so much more effective. Here's how it was written in the script.
Interior hallway, night. He sags against the wall, unable to look at the cops who hover there. Cop, faint. What the hell did that, Lieutenant? There ain't even a head left. Lieutenant Thompson, goddamned if I know, tries to straighten. What's the coroner say? Cop, he's in the John, puking since he saw it. Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, the coroner puking his guts up and the earlier jibe about needing a mop rather than a stretcher just paint a wonderfully kind of macabre picture without having to show us, the full kind of fallout. This is a great way you can save, money and create atmospheric moments in your own screenplays. A lot of the time showing a reaction is as powerful, if not more powerful than showing the thing itself. So Nancy comforts her drunk mother, who apologizes for lying to her daughter all this time. She drops a very important line that's not in the script. It goes something like, "You face things, Nancy. That's your gift. But sometimes you have to turn away."
In the script, Marge is far more intoxicated and way less coherent.
Nancy is prepped and ready, and she sets her alarm to wake her in 10 minutes and says the Lord's Prayer before settling down to sleep, possibly for the last time, Lee.
Nice. So in the script, we get another interesting scene with Glenn's father and Lieutenant Thompson that didn't make it to the final film.
Interior, Glenn's living room, night. Lieutenant Thompson trudges down the stairs and confronts Glenn's father. Lieutenant Thompson, I know it's hard to think at a time like this, Walter, but can you think of anyone who could have done such a thing? The father stares away, his voice low and dull. Mr. Lance, he done it. Thompson looks at the man, baffled. Lieutenant Thompson, who? Who did that? Mr. Lance, Krueger. Lieutenant Thompson, Krueger? The father gives him the strangest look. Mr. Lance, had to have done it. No one else is in there. Lieutenant Thompson, how do you know that? Mr. Lance, because I thought Glenn was going to sneak out to see your lunatic daughter, that's why. So I locked him in his room. Getting control. Sorry. Anyways, the door was still locked when we heard the screams. He blinks. Mr. Lance continued. Maybe God's punishing us all. Lieutenant Thompson, much lower and hard. Keep your head. This is a fucking flesh and blood killer we're talking about. Mr. Lance, like Rod Lane. A voice calls down from upstairs. Cop off screen. Lieutenant Thompson, coroner wants to show you something. Thompson gives Mr. Lance one final look, then heads upstairs. Yeah, I mean, this is a really cool moment. I like the whole sins of the past coming back to haunt them, and that being acknowledged in this moment. You know, it's the classic kind of who pays for the sins of the parents thing, right?
Absolutely. So in the script, there's an interesting script note about a couple of amended scenes, maybe of interest to somebody, so I'll just read that out quick. Note, these rewrites of scenes 180 and 180A replace Nancy walking through the dream streets at night and Nancy approaching the huge deserted building at night, prior to her entering the boiler room the final time.
Yeah. Nancy falls asleep to Glenn's words about turning your back on monsters in your dreams at the 1 hour, 16-minute mark. And then she's descending the stairs of her house down into the basement where she goes to retrieve Krueger's glove from the boiler, but it's Goddenly. She heads further down into the boiler room where Freddy awaits. Further down she goes, deeper into the monster's lair. She calls out a challenge, but it goes unanswered. And Nancy makes her way into the heart of the beast's lair, where she discovers Glenn's blood-soaked headphones. She taunts him again, and this time Freddy takes the bait. Nancy manages to avoid him and lure him back to her house, but with only 10 seconds until her alarm wakes her, things are looking pretty grim. But then the Springwood slasher looms from the shadows, and Nancy, full-on flying, tackles the motherfucker before being awoken by her alarm.
Absolutely. For best final girl ever.
So Nancy snaps awake, alert, but she's alone. There's no Freddy anywhere, Lee. She sits up and after a moment laments she must indeed be crazy after all when, bam, Freddy lunges from the other side of the bed at the 1 hour, 12-minute and 15-second mark, and it is on Lee. Nancy smashes a coffee pot over his head before fleeing her room and setting the first trap outside.
It's on now. You know, Freddy is at a massive disadvantage now. I mean, he is still lethally dangerous, but now the tides have turned. You know, he's on Nancy's turf now.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy calls for help out of the window, but the bumbling cop assigned to watch seems to be as useless as most of the other adults in the movie. Freddy finally breaks through the door and boom, he takes a fucking sledgehammer to the belly, Lee, before toppling over the banister and down the stairs.
I think if you replace the nightmare music with the Benny Hill theme, you know, you could almost play this as a comedy now.
Absolutely. So Nancy lures Freddy into a tripwire, which triggers an IED that causes even more damage, but he's still coming. Nancy smashes another window and screams for help. And this time, Lee, the cop is all like, okay, maybe I should let the lieutenant know. Nancy lures Freddy down into the basement now, where she douses him in gasoline and sets the son of a bitch on fire. And there's a wicked fire stunt here. A burning Freddy climbs the stairs, only for Nancy to knock him back down, only for him to try and climb them again. And finally, Lieutenant Thompson heads over with some backup and they kick the door in. There's no sign of Freddy in the basement, but there are a set of burning footprints leading upstairs. And Nancy realizes that Freddy must be after her mother, not Marge, Lee.
Well, this makes a lot more sense when you remember that in the script, it was Mad Marge, you know, who delivered the coup de grace to Freddy back in the day.
Yeah. So Nancy and her father arrive to see Freddy killing Marge before her skeletal body descends into a hellish purple abyss, which promptly vanishes.
I love the way that skeletal Marge just kind of waves a final goodbye, or maybe it's more of a meh, what are you gonna do? Kind of a kind of send off.
It looked like a sort of slight Nazi salute, didn't it? With the stiffness of it, you know. So Nancy tells her father she's okay and sends him downstairs, claiming she needs him immediately, but she's clearly up to something. She turns away from the bed just as Freddy begins to rise from it at the 1 hour, 26-minute and 20-second mark. But Nancy has no fear. In fact, she claims to have found Freddy's weakness. She exclaims that this whole thing is a dream, and she takes back all the power she gave him. She wants her mother and her friends back. A disgruntled Freddy lunges at her, but Nancy's indifference proves his undoing, and he disintegrates into nothing. Nancy opens the door, steps outside, and it's a beautiful summer's day. Marge is there and states she's going to quit drinking. Nancy is no longer scared, with no white streaks in her hair. Glenn, Tina, and Rod pull up in Glenn's car to take them to school. It's all goodly until the top flips up on the car, a familiar red and green stripe at the 1 hour, 28 minute, 30-second mark. The doors lock and the windows bolt before the car seemingly tears away of its own volition. A desperate Nancy looks back at Marge, or an incredibly poor dummy resembling Marge is dragged through the tiny window of her front door, and we're left with some little girls singing the Nightmare nursery rhyme. So what the fuck was that, Lee, all about?
Okay, so before we discover just what the fuck indeed, let's have a look at how the script handled this final showdown. It was largely the same, but with a few important key differences. First of all, on the page, Marge was far more involved in the final showdown, at one point literally impaling herself on Freddy's claws in order to give Nancy time to escape. Check it out.
Behind her, the door splinters. Nancy whirls around just in time to see Krueger bull in. Nancy's eyes go wide. She's trapped against the bars and has nowhere to go. The man bunches his knives into a single thick blade and rushes her, stabbing. Nancy closes her eyes. Then from out of frame, Marge leaps between the two. Marge, no! She blocks the charge perfectly, blocking the knives. Both she and Nancy are slammed backwards against the bars behind. Drunk though she is hanging onto Krueger's weapon hand, keeping the knives inside herself, away from her daughter. Marge, Nancy, for God's sake, run!
Yeah, in fact, Marge is present through much of the final battle, like taking shots at Freddy and trying to protect Nancy throughout.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why remove or reduce her role, do you think?
I mean, it's Nancy's time to shine here, I think, and she's confronted this horror pretty much alone throughout the whole film. And I think it's only fitting that she faces it alone here at the end as well. You know, she's earned this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And also, if you think sort of, if Craven's thinking about the who pays for the sins kind of bit, thematically, it might be a bit odd for Marge to be quite so central and active in this sort of climax, absolutely. I think.
There's also a cool moment with Nancy's father over at Glenn's house.
Interior, Glenn's upstairs hallway, night. The coroner steps out of the bathroom, peeling bloody rubber gloves, pale and sweating. Coroner, found you something, Donald. Should remind you of something. The man shoves out his hand to Lieutenant Thompson. Thompson stares at it without touching it. A long, thin steel blade, razor sharp, attached to some sort of ring and armature broken off. The coroner gives a sweaty, grim smile. Coroner continued. Only place I've ever seen such a thing before was 10 years ago. Remember that fucker Fred Krueger? Lieutenant Thompson has just knocked Parker sprawling in his race to the stairs. Parker. Hey, your daughter's acting kinda... Thompson's gone. Strange?
See, I really love this scene. I kind of wish they'd left this one in.
Yeah, any thoughts on why they didn't?
I'm kind of stumped with this one. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that, like in the rest of the film, they've tried to downplay the parents' involvement as much as possible to kind of focus on Nancy and her story. I think, kind of to reflect the whole sins of the fathers kind of vibe we have going on with the film.
Yeah, no, I agree. For me, I think at this point in the movie, pacing's a factor too, right? You don't want to break the momentum of this sort of final moment.
Absolutely. So finally, we also have a little change in the last moments of the film in the script.
Angle inside the convertible. Glenn slips into the seat next to Nancy. Someone else is driving, it seems. Nancy looks up to the driver. The big man turns and grins at Nancy, a terrible, scarred, hideous leer of a grin, Fred Krueger's grin. Angle back outside the convertible as its top clamps over the kids within, a bright red and yellow top that closes as fast and hard as a bear trap. Nancy's frightened face flies to the window, pressing against the thick glass as the car roars away from the curb and into the thick fog. Camera pans to a group of little girls, half hidden by the fog, jumping rope and singing gaily. So, hate to sound like a stuck record, Lee, but any thoughts on this one?
Apparently, they went through a few different endings, and I think they settled on the one with the most punch. If Freddy's in the car, he can't drag Marge through the window, right? And that awful special effect has become somewhat iconic over the years.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I found this touch confusing, to be honest, because Freddie's priority sort of now seems to have switched to Marge, which I thought was odd.
Hmm.
Unless he knows he no longer has any sort of sway over Nancy in the dream sort of world and is in some way his sort of switched to the doers of the deed rather than their kids. But yeah,
Yeah,
confusing.
yeah. I mean, I think this ending was pretty much inserted with sequels in mind. I think originally it was going to end on a fairly happy note, but the producers realized they had something quite special here, and they could get sequels out of this, so they added that at the last moment. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty much inserted with sequels in mind. And after the awful sequel, Freddy's Revenge, we do eventually get closure for Nancy in part three, which effectively canonizes all of part one, bar from that ending scene.
Hmm,
So,
interesting.
so come on, man, what did you think of the film, and what did you think of the script?
Yeah, man. I mean, I thought it was good. I mean, I remember sort of watching. I remember bits of this from watching it, as I mentioned, in a previous episode, sort of years and years ago. Definitely got that kind of slightly schlocky kind of 80s horror feel, which I quite
Mm.
liked.
Yeah,
And I mean, I have to say, like, at no point was I in the least bit scared or unnerved during the rewatch. But I did enjoy it on its own terms. I think there's some sort of subtle humor which comes through, which is quite nice. And it's definitely got sort of this energy in the movie.
yeah,
I mean, you can totally see why audiences would, respond to this in the way that they did, because it is a thrill ride. And I think, at the time, Freddie would have been totally new as a character, and is a very strong kind of visual.
yeah,
So you can see why it kind of took off and struck a chord, right?
yeah,
But yeah, man, I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a stone cold classic for a reason. I'll be honest, I'd forgotten just how good this film is and how sort of terrifying this initial vision of Freddy was. I've been so used to the quippy, wisecracking lunchbox Freddy. I was quite pleasantly surprised to see just how sinister he was in his first ever outing. And I'm looking forward to watching the remake after putting fresh eyes on the original.
Nice, dude. Okay, then, man, let's break this baby down. So let's begin the breakdown by looking at the biggest differences, if indeed there were any, Lee, between the screenplay and the film.
Okay, so we had quite a bit of trimmed dialogue and a fair selection of relatively minor deleted scenes, most of which amounted to reducing the importance of the parents and their original sins. And that leaves us with a very much, parents are unflexible and stubborn versus kids are more open and adaptable motif. One interesting thing in the script, Fred Krueger is written as like a huge hulk of a man, and his size and physicality is often mentioned and referred to in the script, whereas on screen he is played by the much smaller, much less physically at least intimidating Robert Englund.
That's interesting, that, isn't it? England certainly has a presence, but he doesn't,
Oh yeah.
doesn't loom in quite the same sort of
Mm.
way, does he? Okay, so let's look at our characters. Are there any introductions that stood out for you as being particularly effective or memorable?
No prizes for guessing where I'm going here. It has to be the first appearance of Freddy Krueger,
Hmm.
which goes like this. Voice off screen. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Tina opens her mouth to scream, but only a dry yellow dust pours out. And at that precise moment, a huge shadowy man with a grimy red and yellow sweater and a weird hat pulled over his scarred face lunges at her, and it's his fingers that are tipped with the long blades of steel, glinting in the bony light and giving the Hulk the look of an otherworldly predator. How about you?
Well, as you pit me to the Freddy intro, I thought it might be interesting to see how sort of Craven draws contrast between Nancy, Glenn, and Rod in their intros. And
Yeah,
this is kind of pretty basic screenwriting practice, but it does give us an interesting look into character intros and how they serve a film.
yeah,
So Nancy and Glenn's intros are actually combined in the script, and they read as follows. Moving angle favoring Nancy. She's a pretty girl in a leather sweater with an easy athletic stride and the look of a natural leader. Glenn, holding her hand, wears one of the school's football jerseys, a good natured, bright kid. Tina's in mid conversation. So here we can see, Craven's definitely painting these two characters as kind of nice, wholesome, good natured kids. Glenn is holding Nancy's hand, which I thought is a good touch. It's kind of sweet and it's all sweets and honey. And then we compare that to Rod's intro, and we get a very sort of visual contrast, which helps the audience really distinguish these characters and understand them in a heartbeat.
mm,
So Rod's intro runs like this. Tina turns to Nancy, but before either can say more, Rod Lane, a lean Richard Gere sort in black leather and new wave studs, joins up with them and interrupts. So here we get that classic kind of bad boy look that we saw in the Blob as well,
yeah.
that character in the Blob.
Oh, that was
Uh,
great. It was
he's wearing
bright.
a leather jacket, it's studs.
Yeah,
And when he joins up with the crew, he interrupts as well, which is,
yeah.
kind of in contrast to Glenn, I think. I also think it's interesting he's called Rod, It's a name with some sort of
Yeah.
amusing sexual kind of
Mm,
connotations, and I think his character really does kind of play up to that well.
yeah.
So yeah, I just thought it was interesting to draw a contrast and just see how Craven is giving the audience kind of the cues to know these characters in an instant, just in a heartbeat, what these people are.
Yeah. Yeah, Rod is he's almost stereotypically amusing, isn't he? Isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a leather bad boy kind of act. But it did occur to me while you were saying that both Rod and Tina died exactly how they most feared. Tina was terrified of dying in her sleep, and Rod was certain he'd die in police custody. Just
Well, it's what you get if you engage in, premarital coitus. I mean,
ugh, it's
so were there any notable lines of dialogue that stood out for you, Lee?
quite a bit actually. I mean, this film has a ton of dry humor in it, which is like it's so my cup of tea. And I've mentioned this one already, but I love the cop's line from just after Glenn's murder. You won't need a stretcher up there. You'll need a mop.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's just a really basic line. Like you've got that bumbling cop who's like assigned to watch Nancy, and he's just like watching all this crazy stuff going on. And Nancy's like leans out the window and she's like, "Get my dad, you asshole." It's always makes me chuckle. Always makes me
Yeah.
chuckle. You've got obviously the nightmare rhyme, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. That's a good one. And I always love Marge's classic line, he can't get you now. He's dead, honey, because mommy killed him.
Yeah. For
That
some
one
reason,
is
when you
so
said that,
scary.
remind me of that line you mentioned in whatever shark movie it was, where she props a kid up on something or other and says, "Mommy's got a shark to kill." Just reminds me of that. Yeah, man. I mean, I sort of, you're right. I mean, there's so many instances of dry humor in the script, and it's quite subtle. But yeah, there's some lines of dialogue which I enjoyed. I mean, firstly, I really enjoyed this exchange between Nancy and Glenn. I mean, it does go on a smidge, but
Yeah.
it goes like this. Interior Nancy's room night. Nancy looks over her shoulder to make sure her mother hasn't heard. Glenn's already through her window and planted on her bed. Nancy points to a chair. Nancy, if you don't mind. Glenn crosses to the chair and plops down. Glenn, so I heard you freaked out in English class today. There's no maliciousness in his voice, and the familiar frankness is actually comforting to Nancy. Nancy, guess I did. Glenn, haven't slept, have you? Nancy, not really. Nancy tries to smile but can't fake it very well. Glenn looks her over. Glenn, you look dead and rained on if you want the ugly truth. And what do you do to your arm? She shrugs, trying to keep it casual. Nancy, burn myself in English class. She hazards a look in the mirror and her jaw drops. Nancy continued. My God, I look 20 years old. Turning back to him. Do you have any weird dreams last night? Glenn slept like a rock. Nancy, pleased. Well, at least I have an objective wall to bounce this off. Off. You believe it's possible to dream about what's going to happen? Glenn, no. Nancy, you believe in the boogeyman? Glenn, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you? No. Rod killed Tina. He's a fruitcake and you know it. Nancy, you believe in anything? Glenn, I believe in you, me, and rock and roll, and I'm not too sure about you lately. I thought that was quite funny for some reason.
Yeah.
I think Glenn, a lot of the humor seems to be centered around Glenn. But there's another sort of line from Glenn here, which I quite enjoyed. Exterior police station night. Glenn's Cadillac convertible careens into the parking lot and screeches to a stop. Glenn and Nancy jump out and head for the station. Glenn, you mind telling me what's going on? Nancy's races into the station without answering. Glenn continued. Oh, I see. That makes it all perfectly clear. I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
There's another one from Glenn talking to Nancy, and that goes like this. Nancy, if I can't, then you all can relax, because it'll just be a simple case of me being nuts. Glenn, I can save you the trouble. You're nutty as a fruitcake. I love you anyway. And then lastly, this banger of a line delivered by Sergeant Garcia. Sergeant Garcia, if it was any more quiet, we could hear owls farting.
Such a random line.
Just- There's just something amusing to me about that line for some reason. I think because it's so off the wall. And I've never thought about owls farting before, but that's quite amusing about that. Anyway, before we break down the scarology, Lee, did you have a scariest moment?
Oh man, this is tough, but I think the obvious answer and probably the one everyone will go with is Tina's death and the preceding nightmare that comes before it. You know, it's just such a wonderfully crafted moment of cinema. It's Freddy at his most malicious, and Tina's no shrinking violet. She still puts up a fight, and that girl's got some balls, man. But it just makes no difference to the outcome. I mean that scene of her being dragged across the ceiling and the walls, while Rod is completely helpless to save her, is just amazing. And in a broader sense, I think you got the fact that there is no sanctuary in this film. I think that's also terrifying. Some of the later movies proposed that you could move away from Elm Street and be safe, as Freddy's powers and influence only extend kind of to his old haunting grounds. But I mean, everyone has to sleep, and imagine knowing what is waiting for you when you do. I think that notion, that thought is absolutely terrifying. How about you?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I didn't find anything particularly troubling really in the film, but I think, that scene with Tina was easily the most effective
Yeah.
kind of scare scene in the film, by a country mile. I thought that was really effective. And as I say, just from a movie sort of geekdom point of view, there's something
Yeah.
wonderful about how they created that effect and sort of reading about that and, the effect that it had and how effective it is. I thought that was great. So, all right, then let's talk about the scarology, Lee. So first of all, yes or no answer. Does the film more or less conform to the 10-minute rule?
Yes.
Nice, dude. What I have to admit, I wasn't expecting that. Break it down for us.
Okay, so we're almost straight into the fights at 1 minute and 20 with Tina's first nightmare. And then it's still under the 10-minute mark when we get Rod's fake out jump scare when he tackles Glenn in the back garden. And then 5 minutes later, we get Freddy looming through the wall above sleeping Nancy, followed a minute later after that by Tina's nightmare and death. And then 9 minutes later, we get Nancy's first on screen nightmare in school, which is followed 8 minutes later by the bath time from hell. A few minutes after that, Nancy heads into the dream world to look for answers, which is followed 5 minutes later by Rod's murder and suicide. And then the scares slow down for a while, with the next big fright being poor Glenn's extremely bloody demise, which is a little over 20 minutes later. And then it's pretty much just balls to the wall scares as Nancy tackles Freddy on his own turf 8 minutes after that, before dragging Freddy into the real world 5 minutes after that, and then another 5 minutes on, depowering Freddy once and for all. And then just a few minutes afterwards, we get that final stinger a few minutes after.
Nice. Well, let's break down those acts for you. So, Act One consists of four evenly paced frights. Act Two gives us another four big scares, but this time they're more drawn out. Act three hits us with a final four big scares, which hit at fast, breathtaking intervals.
Fantastic. Do you have any thoughts on the themes at work here in the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this is about, desire for justice. I mean, I think you could easily
Mhm.
add in fear of the unknown and possibly morality of individuals when we're looking at our Parker themes, but definitely sort of desire for justice. I think
Yeah.
more broadly, the film looks at, as we mentioned a few times, sort of who pays for the sins of the parents. I think that's pretty clear. So, yeah, probably don't need to elaborate on that too much. I think the idea of innocence runs through the film quite a lot. And
Hmm.
certainly Nancy is portrayed as being quite pure. Tina, by contrast, comes across as a little more kind of liberal with her choices. As per genre rules, she sort of pays the price. I think it's a pretty standard horror trope, this. So possibly not a theme per se. But there is a really cool line in the script, though, where Craven highlights Nancy's innocence. And that says, close on Nancy on TV monitor, asleep like the child she is, innocent. I also found the idea of kind of subverting safe spaces and turning them into places of dread was pretty strong. In this case, sort of sleep, obviously, and the home are both shown to be places of danger and horror, and places you can be trapped.
Hmm.
And I think in a way, this is similar. It's a similar idea to what Carpenter explored with Halloween, where suburbia was being turned into a sort of place where a killer roams. I think it's a similar idea here, really. But yeah, what about you, dude? What did you think?
I think for me, the driving force here is like you said, it's the desire for justice with a side helping of fear of the unknown. I think it's that parents' initial desire for justice that inspired their vigilante acts and technically unleashed Freddy upon their children. Even if you look at it from a twisted angle from Freddy's point of view, his actions are almost reparations for what was done to him. You could argue that in his own sick and twisted mind, he is seeking a form of justice himself.
Hmm.
And when Tina is killed, the authorities immediately pin the blame on Rod. Again, it's their desire for justice that has them overlook probably supernatural elements. And to be fair, you can't really blame them for overlooking that kind of thing at this point. But the whole sins of the past, sins of the fathers thing going on. And I think the power of fear is another. Krueger is quite literally fueled by the fear of his victims, and it's only by overcoming that fear at the end that Nancy is able to, albeit temporarily, able to defeat him.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's cool. Okay, so what, if anything, do you think you learned from the script here, Lee?
Okay, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first Wes Craven script we've covered. And it's just a fascinating look at the mind of a genuine titan of the genre. Craven has a wonderful way of writing here. I think it's almost sort of mythological, and he works music and sound into his action lines really well. He does tend to veer towards longer action lines, which, as regular listeners will know, this is something of a sticking point of mine. I actually ran the screenplay through a little algorithm to look deeper at this, which had some interesting findings. So 61% of the film's action lines came in at one or two lines in length. 30% came in at three or four lines in length. And bear in mind, I'm of the mentality that three is probably the most that you need. But 9% of the action lines were divided between 5 and 8 lines in total, which means there were three action lines in this script that were 8 lines long.
Mm.
And make of this what you will, but I at least found it to be very interesting, and I'm fully prepared to accept I may be the only human being on Earth who has that perspective. But ultimately, I think if I'm going to take anything away from the script, it's Craven's constant use of dynamic word choice. Some of these action lines are incredibly long, but when you're reading it, nothing drags. He never uses a dull word where a cooler one could be inserted. I mean, here's a couple of examples, right? This is from when Nancy's in the sleep clinic. He stops outside, visible through the glass. Nancy twists around, eyes still closed. She's nevertheless holding her head in the attitude of prey, listening for the first faint sound of a predator's approach. Or this one. This is Nancy just outside the school. She shakes herself silent, wipes the tears away with a slash of her sleeve. She rubs her arm absently, lost in thought, then reacts in surprise and pain. She lifts her arm and stares at the spot she's touched. And finally, this is from the final confrontation. She starts down again and then again. Nancy descends, each ladder narrower or more twisting, each level deeper, wetter, darker, more airless. Soon she's gasping for air, but still she pushes herself on. She doesn't stop until she breaks out at last at the very bottom of the place, a wet, firelit sump deep in the bowels of the place. I mean, I just literally fast scrolled to three random pages and selected an action line from each, but each one is masterfully written, dynamic word choice, and brilliant visual storytelling.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I totally think this script is worth a read just for Craven's prose. It's pretty good in places. I think it's funny because when I was sort of thinking about what to discuss in terms of learnings, I picked out pretty much exactly the same passages that we've highlighted throughout the dissection and for the same reasons. But to sum up, there are a few things I wanted to highlight. Obviously, something we've already discussed is Craven's referencing of sound and music cues within the script itself. He also does a lot of direction on the page in terms of camera moves and angles and sort of explicit descriptions of characters' POV and what's in the frame and so on. I mean, this is obviously sort of debatable in terms of screenwriting practice, and it's certainly not something that I would do or tend to do. For me, I mean, it's sort of I did find it a little bit much in this script,
Hmm.
and I did find on the whole it sort of there were occasions where it really drew me out of the reading experience. I think just the
Yeah.
volume of it. I think it can certainly sort of affect the tone you're trying to convey if it's done too much.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought it's interesting to sort of see how Craven writes, and he's obviously a
Hmm.
very sort of visual storyteller and writer. But I picked out a few passages in the script which highlight this. So here are some examples of how the script reads and how Craven sort of weaves in both camera direction and music cues. So the first one goes like this. Music slips back in, subtle but tense as we track with Nancy as she walks alone down a sidewalk edged with thick, flowering oleander. She cocks her head, puzzled, as if sensing something. Music mounts. Nancy looks across the street, reverse in her POV. A man is over there in dark clothes reading a newspaper, but really watching her. Nancy shrugs and continues on, then stops and looks back again. In her POV, we see the man is gone. Next moment, with a music sting, a bloodied hand jumps out from the opposite direction, clamps over Nancy's mouth, and drags her into the bushes. And this next one, we get a similar sort of thing, but here Craven refers to the nightmare theme. And this is something that he sort of actually refers to quite a bit in the script. And that goes like this. The needle of the graph gives a jagged pitch up, plunges, then surges well above the 8 mark. A strange music cue, dissonant and threatening, creeps in. The nightmare theme slurred into awful minors and weird dissonance. King stares at the gauge in disbelief, rapping his finger on its glass. And then this last one I picked out looks at a few things we've mentioned just combined, and you get a flavor of the script sort of entire with this passage. And I'll sort of point out a few things as we go here. So, exterior, the school day. Nancy walks out of the building shaken, then pauses at one of the big pine trees out front, stops and rests her head against its bark, teeth set. Nancy starts to shake, and next second she's sobbing like a broken-hearted, frightened child. I just thought that was really good prose there, this idea of her sort of sobbing like a broken-hearted, frightened child. Great sort of imagery. But she shakes herself silent, wipes the tears away with a slash of her sleeve. And that's something we were referred to about word choices, these sort of
Yeah.
idea of slashing sleeves and that sort of stuff. She rubs her arm absently, lost in thought, then reacts in surprise and pain. She lifts her arm and stares at the spot she's touched. Insert on her arm and the burn there, about the size and shape of a $50. Wider on Nancy, utterly chillingly confused. I just thought that was a great line as well,
Hmm.
very evocative. Tina against the tree, inches away from Nancy, turns her eyes and says, Tina, couldn't get back to sleep at all. Beat. What you dream. So I think, yeah, that's sort of examples of all of that kind of combined
Yeah.
together. Obviously, the word choices, the sort of really the really interesting prose from Craven. We've got the idea of POVs and obviously sort of camera direction, um, the sort of sound effects as well. So I thought that was quite interesting. But in terms of what I learned, I mean, I think all this is to say, I haven't really learned loads from the script itself. I mean, all these passages are pretty standard in terms of formatting. Obviously, all the techniques on display are sort of perfectly legitimate. They've got good points and bad points in terms of flow and how sort of prescriptive you want your script to be. Some collaborators obviously don't like that as much. Craven's obviously directing the film, so slightly different sort of thing. As I said, for me, I tend not to use camera direction or music cues really when writing. And on reflection, I think that's just because I feel it breaks up kind of engagement in the script to a degree. And I think you can lose a bit of momentum or sacrifice some immersion you've created with your readers. And I did actually find that in this script, Lee. I found that it sort of broke flow quite a bit and pulled me out of the moment quite a bit when sort of reading. When you're having to sort of read specific visual inserts that Craven is looking for, right? And specific
Yeah.
music cues. I did find that sort of break up the momentum of the script and, affected things a little bit. I think my real takeaway here is, just kind of thinking about your prose, how your script is flowing, and your word choices. I mean, Craven is obviously seeking to use words that evoke Freddy's claws. He uses some
Yeah.
really beautifully kind of constructed passages as we've discussed, which really illuminate Nancy's mindset, which I think are powerful and evocative. He's also not afraid to be a bit on the nose in terms of theme, which I actually found quite interesting because where he does this, it doesn't feel too forced. I felt in this
Yeah.
script, it's kind of justified by the moment, and he's describing Nancy's innocence in the example that we sort of gave earlier. Um, the one thing I think I will take away is and I know we both talk about this, but like these long sort of action lines, I
Mm.
find a bit sort of I struggle with a little bit. It's
Yeah.
there's a fair few sort of long passages in this script that sort of fall into the sentence of 1,000 commas kind of ballpark,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just find sort of I don't know, man. Shit to read is like not that's too strong, but you know,
Yeah.
I don't find them
Challenging.
particularly
Mm.
pleasurable to read.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
can become a mouthful when you're trying to read them out loud, definitely. But yeah, I mean, some good sort of inspiration, I think, if not sort of explicitly learning things, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. I mean, Craven, he was an absolute master storyteller, and if his other scripts are anywhere near this interesting, I think we'll be in for a treat when we cover them. Like you said, I think sometimes things do feel a little overwritten in here, and there are a lot of camera music cues. But again, Craven did have that writer director privilege that we so often go on about. If you're not directing the film, then you don't put the camera stuff in, you don't put the sound stuff in, you just write the script. Um, but like I said, sometimes it does feel a bit overwritten, but I kind of found it was much the same case with Darabont when I read a Darabont script. They from a technical perspective, they do come across as a little overwritten, but I mean, it's almost like these guys are crafting works of literature. It's just their style, and for me at least, it works. But I just think if you're that good at storytelling, you've got a bit of extra leeway.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, I agree. Okay, well, I think we're almost done here, dude. But before we wrap up, talk about our next episode, what would you rate the script and the film as here, Lee?
Okay, so I'm gonna go 9 out of 10 for the film, and I'm gonna go 8 out of 10 for the script. So I think the film is very close to perfection. And while the script, as you said, it's a little overwritten in places, it does come across a bit janky sometimes. I don't think any of that writing is wasted. As Craven was a master of visual storytelling and painting images with his words. So I'm going to go 9 for the film, 8 for the script.
Oh, there's a big mark for the film there, Lee. Nice. Well, I mean, you'll be frustrated to hear I went a little lower. So I gave the film, I think I might revise it. I'm going to give the film an 8, just because I feel, I mean, it lost marks because it wasn't all that scary. And in some places, I thought it was kind of a little daft, which is fine, which I
Hmm.
actually sort of in retrospect kind of enjoyed. It may well be that it's, that's what's Craven's going for. And in that case, I should maybe push it a little higher. But, I found it enjoyable, the film, in a sort of history of cinema slash kind of genre schlock kind of way, more so
Yeah.
than being kind of truly engaged or invested emotionally in any way. It wasn't really emotionally invested in this, and I didn't really find
Mm.
it sort of particularly scary. But in much the same way, I guess, something like Reanimator sort of plays out. That's obviously more explicitly going for laughs, but it
Yeah.
has that
Yeah.
kind of schlocky horror feel, and I think
Mm.
this has that the same, although it's tonally slightly different. Yeah, I mean, I thought it probably wasn't scary enough to be sort of scary, really scary, or funny enough to be comedic. So
Mm.
I was kind of left a little bit in the middle, if you know what I mean, with
Yeah.
this one. The script, I'm gonna give a 7. I was tempted to give this a 6. I think it's really well written, and there are sort of, moments of prose in this where Craven is
Yeah.
really sort of doing some great stuff. And I think the downfall for me is Craven is obviously the director. He's obviously really thought out his film, with the cues and the angles and all of that sort of stuff. But for me, I mean, it was just there were a few things. It was too heavy on camera direction for me.
Yeah.
And obviously the sort of cues, I'm kind of enveloping that into this, too heavy on sort of direction on the page. Um, and, there are these sort of, as I say, sort of sentence of 1,000 commas, which I just find difficult to read and sort of, they just don't flow particularly well for me. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that said, this is sort of entirely wholly to my personal taste.
Yeah.
So just to not, you know, get the full kind of backlash of your horror at me giving it a low score, I'm going to give it a 7.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. So what does that give us? That gives us a grand
I don't
total
want to
of
shit on your faves, Lee, basically. So
Mate, you can shit on my faves. They're
I'm
my
being
faves. They're not
generous, right?
necessarily your faves. No, I think 8 for the film is absolutely fair. I think 7 for the script maybe is a little low, but again, I can see where you're coming from with the overwritten. I mean, I had such a fun time reading it. I was maybe a little biased, but I just the prose, the way it was written, the word choices, the visual storytelling just really kind of hit my buttons. But
Yeah,
so if my maths is correct, which if it's not, I apologize. Maths was never my strong point, but that should give us 17 out of 20 for the film, which I think is a very respectable score. 15 out of 20 for the script.
yeah,
So that's still like just out of the top percentile there. But
yeah.
we were up there with the film and almost there with the script. That's still a healthy score.
Not too bad, is it?
No, no, I think that's fair. And like I say, you back your points up, so I'm happy
And
with that.
the other thing is, I think it's just personal choice, or
Yeah.
personal preference, right? Rather than choice. I mean, it's, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
personal
as
choice.
which is ironic because I am the first person to when I'm doing feedback for people, one of the first things I pick out on is your action lines are so horrifically overwritten, and then
Yeah,
I'm gushing over a script with like eight line long action lines, and it's just like I do feel like a hypocrite sometimes, and
I was going to
I've
say,
said this before on Darabont's work, but it's just the way they write is so good. It's
yeah.
just so enrapturing to me. And if you write that well, you want to write eight long lines, then you go for it. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't feel I am not in the same league as Wes Craven and Frank Darabont, so I'm going to stick to my short and snappy action lines for the time being. Maybe I'll
Yeah, yeah,
treat
yeah.
myself with the odd 4 line if I'm
Or push the
if I'm
boundaries,
feeling
right?
generous. Yeah.
Go to 3 or 4, really mix really mix things up. Okay, man. Well, that's cool. That was enjoyable. So what's on the agenda for next time, Lee?
Well, obviously, next time it's round 2 of our original versus remake face off as we take a deep dive into the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, we'll see how we feel about that one next time. If you enjoyed the podcast, as we say, sort of please, give us a like, follow the show, send it to a friend, all of that good stuff. If you're feeling generous again and you listen to the show regularly, giving us a review would be amazing. Just any way you listen to it, you can do that. It really, really will help us. We do love the validation, obviously, but it helps us improve as well. I think, Lee, doesn't it, over time? and helps us
Absolutely.
with our
Absolutely.
algorithms.
Every
Um,
review and rating is like a beacon of light in my otherwise dark existence.
oh, yeah. It's reviews and it's recording this, isn't it? That's where the light comes for Lee.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go check out our socials, Facebook, Blue Sky, bit of Instagram. We can be reached there if you want to reach out. We love hearing from you. We publish to YouTube, so you can listen to us there if you want. Feel free to drop us a line with any thoughts on our website. That is, of course, script2screenpodcast.com. Always love hearing from you guys. This was one of our most requested episodes, wasn't it? Films we cover. So we do
It
listen
was.
and
Yep.
we do sort of take note. There's
Yep.
a lot more content on the website as well. Obviously, as we mentioned, script samples, scarology graphs, all sorts of things to keep you entertained and informed. We are obviously now offering script reading services as well, where me and Lee both analyze your script and give you tailored feedback on your work. And we are producing pitch decks for projects now for you as well. So we'll collaborate with you to create a stunning pitch deck for your project, which you can take out in the world and get pitching. It's worth mentioning as well, we do not rely on generative AI when creating pitch decks. It's all our own work, isn't it, Lee?
Yep.
So if that's of interest, go to our website, navigate to the script reading page. You can find all of the information there. But until next time, do take care.
Don't fall asleep and keep on writing those scares.